I
Okay,
am
full
going to go
confessional here.
ahead and convene the May 15th meeting of the Oregon Climate Action Commission and welcome all the commissioners and public that are joining us today. And we'll go to the next slide and just remind folks of how to support the or how to engage with the software we have.
Hi, I'm Judy, and welcome everybody. I'm Public Service Representative for Odo. For the teams, you'll notice that there's the chat bubble. If you can click on that to follow the chat or enter questions during the presentation. Next to that, or two over, is the hand icon. You can click this to raise your hand if you have questions or comments. Please remember to click it again to lower your hand when you're finished. Next to that is the smiley icon. Click that to leave reactions. Down a little further is your camera icon. That turns your camera on and off. Next to that is your microphone icon. This will turn your microphone on and off during the presentation. Please leave the microphone muted or off during the presentation to minimize the background distractions unless the presenter asks you to turn yours on or off. Thank you very much.
And just a reminder for folks, commissioners, if you know, I know that there are some times when you can't be on camera, but to be on camera as much as you can would be appreciated. Appreciate that. Okay, next slide. So we have a number of really important topics to discuss. Things have shifted a little bit in terms of some of the projects that we're working on as a commission and that Odo is helping us with, which will be pushed another month. But we have some really good topics on the agenda today, including some discussion of emerging technologies, as well as we've got some interesting perspectives from a panel of transportation experts, which we're excited about. We are going to hear about the environmental justice mapping tool, which the state has been working on. And then we're going to hear an update on the consumption-based emissions, and then go to public comments and closing remarks. So that's kind of our agenda for today, which I'm excited about. And with that, I will open things up to updates from commissioners and staff. And for what I would like to update is having Jamshed share kind of public comment and information about the Tigger report. So if you wouldn't mind giving us that.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Commissioners, I wanted to provide an update on the greenhouse gas emissions reduction forecast and the gap analysis that is currently underway as part of the Tigger project. The public comment period on the draft gap measures and scenarios ended on April 10th, and we're greatly appreciative of all the comments that we received during that process. We are currently planning to post all of the comments as well as an updated list of measures and scenarios by next week. At the Commission meeting next month, we, along with our consultant Sustainable Solutions Group, are planning to present the results from calculating the greenhouse gas emissions reductions associated with the gap measures, as well as the impact on emissions from the different scenarios that we have identified. We look forward to that discussion with you. Thank you for the opportunity to provide an update, and I'll turn it back over now to the Chair.
Thank you, Jamshed. Are there other updates? Commissioner Lewis.
Oh, good morning. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Good morning, everyone. I just thought I'd say a couple of things this morning about the transportation sector. We've had a couple of really great sessions over the last couple of meetings, and we're appreciative of all the updates that we're getting for the state of Oregon. I mean, I think it's worth mentioning that we're in a unique historical period with the increase in transportation fuel prices that's affecting everyone. It's part of our larger inflation, cost of living impacts that are really having an impact on people's lives. So I was just going to say how there's a lot of attention to both sides of the climate change agenda for the transportation sector. We spend a lot of time talking about the important work in the renewables area, but there's also an important things to talk about on the efficiency side. The things that each of us try to do on a daily basis, say if we're driving somewhere and we're trying to save money on fuel because of the high cost of fuel. If you combine trips, if you try to carpool, things like that, those are all things that affect the climate change impacts for the transportation sector. So I hope that we can continue to talk about the importance of the transportation sector and keep in mind the full portfolio of options related to that. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Commissioner Dotson.
Thank you. I just wanted to mention that the Data Center Advisory Committee will be having a session 2 weeks from today. You can participate, you can watch it online, and also public comments opportunities are available at the end of it. And the focus for this coming session will be on energy, and so it'll touch on climate change and emissions impacts related to data center development. And so that may be relevant to both the commissioners and to any of the members of the public who are watching.
And Commissioner Dotson, those meetings are held in Portland, is that right?
They're held in Portland, but the space doesn't really facilitate in-person attendance. So online attendance is the best way to participate.
And before I go to Commissioner Apter, I want to just acknowledge that Commissioner Apter has volunteered and been accepted to be the vice chair of the Oregon Global Climate Action Commission. So super excited to have you participating in this role, and really appreciate that you were willing to accept that. So thank you. And now to you.
Thank you, Chair McDonald. I'm very excited and honored to continue serving on the commission in my new capacity. I wanted to share a couple of updates. One somewhat related to what Commissioner Dotson was just speaking to, related to data centers, and make sure that folks had seen there was a really important order issued by the Oregon Public Utility Commission last week, a very significant milestone in implementing the 2025 Power Act, which was part of the legislature's affordability package from the last long session. So this new order is the first very significant milestone in implementing that legislation to ensure that data centers are paying for their own grid costs, including generation, transmission, and capacity. And the order also includes some really important decisions and requirements around data centers paying for energy efficiency investments, as well as around clean energy. So under the new order, new data centers won't be interconnected unless there is enough clean energy to meet their added demand. Those are just some of the highlights. I encourage folks to take a look at that order, and I'm happy to drop in some links helping to break down, but a very important win for energy affordability and for the grid that I wanted to make sure folks had seen. And then the other update I just wanted to make sure was on folks' radars is the upcoming Oregon Clean Grid Collaborative Summit, which is this Monday in Salem. I will also drop a link in. It includes really incredible lineup of utilities, advocates, legislators from other states, really speaking to a lot of the conversations we've had on the commission around challenges to addressing barriers to expanding and strengthening the grid, as well as solutions in the role of the state. So I hope if folks are able, they will join, but definitely many conversations ahead with that group. And this is the second annual summit that the OCGC has convened. That's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Vasatinsky.
Good morning, everyone. I just wanted to make a couple quick announcements. One of the projects that's been near and dear to my heart and my professional interests has been the creation of the first climate justice plan in Multnomah County, and I think the state of Oregon, for that matter, and maybe only the second or third in the entire nation, where the focus shifts from simply reducing emissions to also kind of taking into account how people who are being affected most by climate impacts are helping to identify solutions to the challenges that we're facing as a community and as a state. So we just finished a revision process. We're going to do some more community outreach. I put a link into how folks can connect with those upcoming sessions next week. And we'll have a kind of open comment period through the end of the month if folks want to submit, an email or a written comment of any kind. Secondly, I'll just note once again that we are in the midst of a prolonged and unprecedented energy crisis. We are paying more as Oregonians, as U.S. citizens, than we ever have before for energy. That's because, our utility rates have gone up, but also we're paying a lot more at the pump. And that's having ripple effects throughout the entire economy. Elsewhere in the world, we're seeing physical shortages. So this isn't even, price destruction or demand destruction through price. It's actual rationing due to lack of, available fuels. So this crisis is continuing to unfold, and I'm hoping that in addition to whatever planned updates we have on the executive order, that we're also going to bring a focus to how Oregon policy can help to bring down the cost for households, everyday Oregonians, and provide relief. And I'll just bring a personal example real quick to some of the barriers that we're facing. My wife and I are planning to do some home energy upgrades. Turns out that we need a new panel. Reached out to our utility to figure out what that was. Turns out they need me to move not only do I need a new panel and new meter or whatever, but like they want us to move the mast, the existing mast, about 6 feet in one direction. No real explanation why or how that makes sense at all, but it's adding another $1,500 a minimum to the cost of my project. And these are just one of many barriers that exist today for Oregonians who are trying to reduce their bills and decarbonize their homes. So I think that's going to need to be an ongoing area of focus for us, is how are we providing relief for households and people can't afford energy, then we're in real trouble here in the state. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Ackerman Munson.
Yes, thank you. I apologize, I'm not on video. My internet's a little bit sketchy at my farm, but I'm listening fully, and I'm very excited to be here. Just a little update. We, as you all know, at Treasury, we passed the Climate Resilience Investment Act, and the investment team is actively working on creating our template to then report to the legislature in 2027, January of 27, about our investments around climate positive strategies, how we're actively managing and analyzing our investments with the climate lens in mind. And we also have just transition as part of our law, where we're looking at our investments in public equities and just transition. So I wanted to announce this. I mean, people know already, but I wanted to let you all know early enough so that if there's anybody who's interested in engaging in this conversation, please reach out to me, and Chair McDonald has my information. You all have it in this group email. Would be happy to talk to you at the state level about some of this work. Thank you, Chair McDonald, for letting me speak for a minute.
Thank you. Commissioner McNichol.
Yeah, good morning, Chair McDonald. I'm wondering if we could get a brief update about the status of the climate protection plan, the CPP, and the lawsuit, and what's going on with that, because the impacts of that are pretty significant on our work. Is there someone from DEQ who can address that?
So, but I'm.
Chair McDonald, can you hear me? This
Yes,
is Colin
thank you.
McConaughey.
Yes,
Yeah,
thank you.
sorry, I don't seem to be able to make my video work. I can
Oh.
see you all, but I don't think you can see me. Yeah, hi folks, this is Colin McConaughey. I manage the Office of Greenhouse Gas Programs at DEQ, and I'm sitting in for Director Felden. We can't really talk too much about active litigation. I can share. Well, let me just check. Chair, do you want me to respond to that in substance, or do you want to schedule something for a later date?
Well, I think anything you can share now, and then we can go into more depth at a future meeting. But anything you can share now would be great.
Certainly. Okay. Not sure that there'll be much more depth that we can go into while this is an active litigation, but I can share an update similar to what Director Felden provided our Environmental Quality Commission just yesterday, which is that yes, there was there is a coalition of energy user interests, gas utilities, businesses that have filed a lawsuit in the Oregon Court of Appeals challenging our commission's authority to adopt and enforce the climate protection program. The nature of the suit is such that they don't file the actual legal argument yet, so we don't have that. We anticipate it being similar to the arguments made under the original climate protection program that was adopted back in 2021. That was a lawsuit that ultimately the Court of Appeals ruled on a very narrow piece of the challenge and not on the substance of the authority of the commission, but struck the program down based on a failure to provide a certain notice. And so now, having readopted the program in 2024, we believe this lawsuit will likely make similar claims, and we may get a ruling this time around on the substance of whether the commission has the authority to adopt and enforce this program this time around. But I think the important message that I would want to deliver to this question is we continue to implement the climate protection program. This does not pause, halt, or delay the implementation of the program. And we continue to be full speed ahead on implementing, including upcoming, I think just yesterday, we issued notice of the first Rules Advisory Committee that we're convening to support a rulemaking to evaluate how the program may regulate manufacturing going forward. So, Chair, I would just emphasize that last point of, again, continuing to implement the climate protection program. And that's about all I can say. I'm sorry. I don't know that I don't know that scheduling a time actually for more substance makes sense, because I'm not sure that there's much else the agency can say at this point.
Yeah, whenever it makes most sense.
Yeah.
But great to
Thank you
know
for
that
that.
it's full speed ahead.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Commissioner Von Hagen.
Good morning, everybody. I wanted to get an update if possible. Well, first of all, congratulations to Oregon on passing 1.25% for wildlife. That's amazing. You know, for me and maybe for you, Kathy, nature equals climate. So that's the connection there. And curious whether there's anybody from ODFW or another agency that can speak to the implementation of that program. And for those of you that have not been following, that's around 37 million annually for wildlife and for landscape scale conservation and connections.
Across staff. I'm not sure I'm seeing anybody from ODFW.
For
But
anybody
speak up.
else that can talk about implementation
Yeah.
of the program would be great. Yeah, or we can do it offline if there's no one.
I can speak just briefly to that. I'm sitting in for Director Colbert, and actually there's a conversation at the ODFW commission meeting, which is happening right now, which is why she's not here today, to talk about the potential implementation of the transient lodging tax and how that might move forward. So it's still being, it's still under discussion, I guess is the way to put that. So there's some conversation.
Hopefully at one of our next meetings, we can tee that up, which would be good.
Yeah.
But thank you for filling in.
Yeah, sure, and I'm sure she'd be happy to talk more about that. And feel free to check out of course, the commission meetings recorded so you can see the latest at another time.
Great, thank you.
Any other updates? Okay, well then we'll, excuse me, jump into our next topic.
Good morning, all. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Oh, good. Okay, so I'm Rob Delmar. I'm a senior policy analyst at Oregon Department of Energy. Thanks for taking some time on the agenda this morning for a quick update on the emerging technologies report that we're working on because of Executive Order 2529. So I'm just going to go through a few slides to show where we are right now, where we're going, and how it overlaps with a few other activities that are going on in the executive order. So next slide, please. Here are the various points where the executive order 2529 sort of overlaps with this commission's work. These are very brief sort of thumbnail titles of what's going on, but you can see down at I3B, Emerging Clean Energy Technologies. This is a report that's described in the executive order and also in the Oregon Energy Strategy, and it's going to be submitted as part of our biennial energy report, which is due on December 1st. Next slide, please. Here's the actual language from the executive order. And again, this is section I3B, and it directs Oregon Department of Energy along with some partner agencies and the governor's office to collaborate on a report on emerging technologies. It asks us to identify and assess opportunities for advanced and emerging carbon-free energy technologies to play a role in Oregon's clean energy future. Also directs us to look at risks and barriers and how some cross-agency work could help to overcome those risks and barriers. Next slide, please. So that part of the executive order is pointing back to Electricity Action 6 in the Oregon Energy Strategy. And for those who care to go read it, it's on page 112. And that also describes this report on developments in emerging technologies. And this part of the strategy also includes a list of technologies that qualify as emerging technologies initially in this report. And those include long duration storage, enhanced geothermal, floating offshore wind, marine energy, and advanced nuclear. And so that gives us our first pass at the technologies that are going to be included in this first iteration of the Emerging Technologies Report. This report will also be repeated with every biennial energy report. And so as new technologies emerge, we will include additional technologies and updates on these listed emerging technologies as we go. And perhaps some of these will cease to be emerging and will be operational adopted technologies in Oregon. So next slide, please. So in developing the list of of technologies that we would look at in this first iteration report of the report. We started with that list that was provided in the energy strategy and referenced in the executive order: enhanced geothermal, enhanced advanced nuclear, marine, offshore wind, and long duration storage. But we also cast a pretty wide net looking at other things that may be out there, and working with our agency partners. We got a few additional ideas, and yeah, Rep Gamba. Oh, you're on mute.
Yes, they automatically do that. What's just a super quick question? What's the definition that you all are using of advanced nuclear?
We, I think, are going to land on the definition that NREL is using in their annual technologies baseline summary. And that includes both small modular reactors and other advanced reactors that make their list of emerging nuclear.
Okay, it's not a very precise and other advanced reactors.
Yeah, I could share some resources from the NREL list. I haven't actually developed this part of the report yet, so it's very much a work in progress. If you have recommendations for what you think should be used to help kind of tighten that definition, we welcome comments. And we also will be looking not just at the NREL resources, but also at some of the facilities that have either been developed or are under development really across the globe, and probably also look at other, hopefully non-industry sources of materials like Lazards and sources like that to see what's kind of emerging in the nuclear space.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, John, go for it.
Just a quick follow-up. My understanding is that nuclear technology is prohibited for deployment in the state of Oregon. So I'm just wondering how applicable it is in the context of this report, or is it just more generally to kind of give a sense of like, hey, these are the things out there if you want to adapt policy to sort of facilitate these technologies?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And nuclear in any form has one of the most insurmountable policy barriers in Oregon that you could imagine, in that it's statutorily prohibited from being developed until there's a long-term energy storage facility somewhere in the country. And the advanced nuclear technologies, they may be modular, they may use newer and safer fuels, but they still generate the same flow of toxic materials at the end of the reactor cycle. And so nothing in the advanced nuclear space changes that radioactive waste stream. It might change the profile of the waste a little bit here and there, and different technologies have different profiles of the waste, but that is one example of a barrier and a policy barrier for development, certainly in Oregon, for any nuclear facilities. Yes, Rep Gamba.
If I might add to that, this is Alan Zelenka. If I might add to that, it also requires a vote of the people in order to put it in Oregon, but it doesn't prohibit utilities from buying the output of nuclear power from other states. So if it were built in Washington or Idaho and imported here, that's not a prohibition. So, and as with the energy strategy that we did, nuclear power was available in the resource stack, but it never got picked even in the out years because it was just way too expensive. It never became the marginal cost resource, the next available lowest cost resource. And so it never showed up in the resource stack because of cost, but it could have been imported. And that's the way we treated it in the energy strategy.
Thank you for saying that. That was part of the point I was going to make. The other part of the point, and maybe I have misread this, but that's why I wanted a definition. The small modular reactors, as I understand it, actually produce more waste per kilowatt hour than the sort of standard current technology. But if I'm not mistaken, fusion does not produce waste. If there's somebody that's more clued in. And so that's why I was asking about the definition. If what we're talking about is fusion, then I think there's a path there. If what we're talking about is SMRs, both for the cost purposes and for the fact that Oregon would not allow that because of the waste, it seems counterproductive to include.
Yeah, no, that's a good comment. And we actually did a piece on fusion in the previous BRR that we published in 2024. And so we do have fusion represented in the last biennial energy report. It could be that we could include it here. One of the screens that we're attempting to apply on all of these emerging technologies is if they have some projection of anticipated costs, both capital development costs, but also levelized cost of energy and operation and maintenance costs, fuel costs. And so some technologies that haven't made it to the point of having cost projections lose some content in what we're hoping to capture in the emerging technologies report. That said, marine energy is in kind of an unusual space in that we have, we've seen operational projects, we've seen interconnection agreements with BPA, but they too have not yet made it into the NREL annual technology baseline reports or the Lazards reports. And so it's not a hard and fast filter for cost projections, but it's certainly helpful when we develop the content. Question?
Mr. Thorndike, sorry.
Yeah, just going to say, just kind of coincidentally on the fusion, pretty recently I met a couple of people who were actively involved working in fusion sort of public-private stuff. And I was surprised to see there was as much current action because, that's one of those things you've always kind of have this, magic thing, and then it turns out it's not really going anywhere. It's still, time horizon is still out there, but I was sort of surprised at how much action there actually is going in that area now, just kind of reacting to Representative Gamba's comments there. So I think it's worth staying in touch on that as an emerging technology.
And sounds like it's worth including fusion in this definition of advanced nuclear, or at least considering it, even if we don't have cost projections or demonstration projects anywhere. It might warrant sort of honorable mention, which there's going to be other technologies that we don't describe that we will identify for future reports. And so that may be where this lands, and we may give it a paragraph or two in advanced nuclear.
Yeah, someone's doing some cost projections because there is some significant investment going into it. So be interesting to, as you said, just keep it in the pot. Yeah. Thanks.
Alan, do you want to add some comments?
Yeah, in response to that, a couple of years ago when the National Association of State Energy Officials was in Portland, there was a whole session on fusion, and I thought it was rather remarkable. There is several entities that are working on this and investing a lot of money into it, but it's still at a very, very nascent stage. Most of them have still not been able to get more energy out of it than put into it. But there are, it's one of those things that's kind of like, that is always just around the corner, but it just takes a little bit of a breakthrough, and then that becomes reality. But maybe in the next 10 years, but maybe in the next 20 or maybe never.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And anything you want to add about the folks, the options that are below, that are in red?
And so these are additional technologies that were identified either within integrated resource plans from the utilities or by DOGAMI or other agencies. Also noticing that Janine put something in the chat about a fusion project that is underway in Seattle. So, or maybe not in Seattle, but a Seattle-based company. So it sounds like there are some advancements there. But some of what we got from other agencies might not fit our definition directly of a clean energy or a carbon-free technology, which it's not really well defined in the executive order, but in this first pass, we're primarily looking at electricity generation technologies. There's so many other exciting things going on out there, but we just have limited staff time and we can't tackle them all. But hydrogen mining, geologic hydrogen is something that is very interesting. Battery minerals mining is on DOGAMI's radar, as is direct air capture and carbon sequestration. We're also seeing, fuel cells are another one of those that is kind of always on the horizon. And we now see, we see it in PAC's IRP and his proposed project with City of Depot Bay. And then some of the other emerging things like, new solar technologies and some of the stuff on the customer side of the meter, demand response, things like that. I don't know that they'll make it into this report, just again because of staff time, but they are things that we've written on in the past and will continue to work on in future reports.
That sounds great. It's interesting to see the list. So thank you.
Yeah, and I think that we are near the end of the slides. Next steps, we're in the process of finalizing the list of technologies. In the coming month and a half or so, we're going to start drafting content, and that's where we'll tighten up some of these definitions. In July, we'll be doing some peer reviews. Once we have the peer reviews done and near final drafts, we'll have the governor's office review them. Then we'll finalize the report, and this is going into a much bigger report. Again, the Biennial Energy Report will be the host of this report. And finally, in November, end of November, actually, I think we publish the Biennial Energy Report. So there are opportunities in future months for another update to this commission if you would like. We could come in maybe in July and share some more updates. You can track it as we go, but certainly I would be happy to come and share additional updates if you like. And with that,
Appreciate that.
Yeah, I think we are.
And just to be clear, Department of Energy does a biennial energy report, and we do a biennial report. So they're two different things, but they hopefully complement each other. Okay, thank you. Any questions?
Thank you.
Okay. Our next topic is to talk about transportation and to hear from folks that aren't with the Department of Transportation, but have other ideas about what we should be thinking about in terms of transportation strategies. So with that, I will turn it over to Jeff Allen, who I think is going to kick things off. And then but also to hear from his colleagues about transportation strategies. So
Great. Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah.
We have a couple of us lined up to talk with you today. So I'm Jeff Allen, Executive Director of Fourth. We're a national nonprofit based here in Portland, working to electrify everything that moves. Some of you may have known us under our former name of Drive Oregon. And I'm joined by Jana Gastelum, I hope. Jana, are you with us? Who's Executive Director of Oregon Environmental Council, and Tim Miller from Oregon Business for Climate. And I think we're going to have Jana go first. And we thought we would keep this pretty casual and conversational. We each have a few opening remarks, 5-6 minutes, hopefully, and then have time for a conversation. So I'm still looking to see if we have Jana.
I am here, Jeff.
It's not good for my heart, Jana.
And then Kathy, I had a few slides. Do you want me to try and share them by taking control of the presentation, or I sent the link this morning as well to the slides?
You want to? I'm good with you sharing. But,
okay.
Let me double check with Jeff.
Sure, that works for me. The slide should be
Okay.
down. So
Okay, great.
Okay, let me. Okay. Is everyone seeing the slides?
Yes, that looks great.
All right. Well, Chair McDonald and members of the commission, good morning. My name is Jana Gastelum. I'm Executive Director for Oregon Environmental Council. We're a statewide environmental nonprofit representing members in every corner of Oregon, and we're delighted to be here today. Thank you, Jeff, for also inviting us to participate. I think we all clearly know why we are here today. The climate crisis is something that impacts all of us. And while we're in the midst of kind of all these polycrises, it is important to continue to think about the systems that underpin all of our wellness. Some reports show that by 2100, if we don't get climate emissions under control, that food insecurity will be on the level of impacting a meal per person per day of lost production. And those are just the basics of what actually keeps us healthy and well. So we all know why we're here. We also know that transportation in Oregon is the largest source of climate pollution in the state. And it's a tricky one because it depends on how the system is designed, as well as decisions by individuals along the way. Transportation is also the second highest household expense. And so if we think about tackling transportation, we actually have opportunities to promote economic opportunity, build better and more affordable quality of life for Oregonians, and make progress on the climate crisis. So in doing that, pretty much virtually every study out there says that we need to do two main things. We need to both dramatically reduce the miles we travel and rapidly accelerate electrification. This is one of many studies that shows that, but the blue wedge is where we need to get to. We need to get below that blue line. And that green line at the bottom shows mode shift and electrification together, helping really get us there. So we need cleaner cars, cleaner vehicles, cleaner fuels, community design that supports that. And then we have many other things across other sectors that are also important. I also just want to take this moment to also note that when we do this, we actually enhance affordability. Climate Solutions did a report called Transforming Transportation and found that individuals could save close to $5,000 a year in transportation costs when we commit to a pollution-free system, largely because fuel is so expensive. And being tethered to international oil markets really ends up being a losing strategy. It really doesn't matter how much oil the US produces, prices are set internationally, and we don't control them. So diversifying away from oil with low carbon fuels and electrification, having mode shifts like transit and active transportation is really the best way to mitigate both price volatility and the climate crisis. So I thought it would be helpful to look and see how we're doing on some of these measures. And if we look at vehicle miles traveled alone, we see that we've really built a system that only enhances adding those miles rather than doing the mode shifting that we really need to do to be successful. And by ODOT's own analysis and the statewide transportation strategy that came out in 2013, say we need to shift about 40% of those short distant trips to other modes. And that's not the system that we're building today. When we hear from Oregonians, the good news is that Oregonians actually want these changes and these investments. When the 2025 transportation package was put out and a roadshow was put together, our group, the Move Oregon Forward Coalition, looked at what came out of those testimonies. And by far and away, the highest percentage of folks said, we want to invest in public transportation. That was a statewide demand, every corner of the state. Folks also want to invest in active transportation options, biking, walking, making it safe to get kids to school, for example. And then to be really careful about how we're making some of those big investments. So going forward, what are some of the things that we need to do? The first is that we really do need to do rigorous greenhouse gas modeling for transportation packages and big dollar projects. And really the last transportation package conversation had zero climate modeling. And it's really important that decision makers and all of us understand carbon scoring for different actions, what really moves the needle and what doesn't. And again, this kind of follows best practices that have come out of ODOT's own analyses, but we find again that the biggest benefits are things like electrification, vehicle mile reduction, and that things like building more lanes to quote, reduce congestion may actually be counterproductive when we're thinking from an emissions perspective. And so to do that analysis, we need to think about what types of investments actually increase emissions and what actually reduces emissions. And all of this, again, if we do it well and do it right, reduces costs for folks and enhances livability. It's also really important that we think about how we align policies and pricing for the most efficient and low carbon outcomes. So we have some good practices in place already, things like true cost pricing or weight mile practices, the Clean Fuels program. But then there are other things that even past analysis assumes we're going to do in the future. Like things like pay-as-you-drive insurance, which we've had a pilot program in Oregon. I don't think it's gotten a whole lot of attention from our transportation agency, but it's things like helping people save money by driving less. That helps encourage combining trips, and even thinking about how we design communities, right? The Main Street in small towns was so great because it had everything that you need all kind of in one place. And then if you have sidewalks in between to be able to walk between your errands, that also is very helpful. And then future things like congestion pricing also helps, and it's being implemented in other states like New York and other countries as well. But it's a more efficient way of using our roads. It spreads trips and it reduces the cost of building big new infrastructure and uses what we have better. And then we do need to think about how we're using our limited dollars and thinking about maintaining the system that we have. Unfortunately, the climate crisis with extreme weather, think about wildfires, coastal erosion, extreme heat that, makes metal softer and makes things slow down. That makes the whole system more expensive to maintain. So by investing in reducing emissions, it helps us actually lower costs overall. But we also have to think about a system that stops saying like, let's build new and bigger, and we'll figure out how to pay for it later. We've got to kind of get off this merry-go-round that we've been on. And we also really need to center communities and equitable access, knowing that 30% of Oregonians can't drive because of age, ability, and income. And AARP just said Oregon actually crossed the threshold for having more older adults than younger people. So when people age out of driving, that means it's harder for them to age in place if they don't have other options. And right now we're kind of balancing the state's transportation budget on the backs of other community members, and that's not an equitable system. So when we do this well and right, again, we get access to economic opportunity, livable communities, the ability to age in place, better health and healthy environments. Lots of other folks later on in this panel are going to talk a little bit more about some of these individual actions, but I wanted the opportunity to zoom out and think about how we do good planning and how we do investments and creating a system that actually helps support affordability and reduce emissions and get us to all the places that we need to get to along the way. Thank you so much.
I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Janet. I think we'll kind of keep going on. I'll talk for a few minutes, then hand it off to Tim, but I see questions already coming in the chat. Love that. Yes. Please keep them coming, and we will get to them. So as I mentioned, Jeff Allen, Executive Director of Fourth, previously Drive Oregon, and our mission is to increase access to electric mobility by reducing barriers, and we really focus on the folks who could benefit the most from this technology and face the most barriers to accessing it. So really designing our programs around low-income communities, communities of color, rural drivers, et cetera. So I'm going to focus mostly on electrification, but you know, we're all supporting all of these solutions. As Jana says, we need to throw all of the spaghetti at the wall to try and reach our climate goals. And I really want to just focus in on handful of things where I think this group's intervention could be helpful, that we need to do to really seriously drive transportation electrification forward in Oregon. I'm going to start picking up on something Jana said about pricing. And fun fact, I actually did my graduate thesis on pay-as-you-drive insurance in 1993. So some of these ideas are not particularly new and innovative. They just take some time to arrive at the right audience. And pricing is absolutely critical to reaching our climate goals. And in a world where nobody is buying gasoline or diesel anymore, which is the world we all need to reach as quickly as possible, we obviously need a different way to pay for roads. And that's part of why I have been serving on the governor's road user fee task force for several years, trying to move the state from the gas tax, which was really innovative when Oregon adopted it as the first state to adopt it over 100 years ago, not so innovative in 2026. A per mile fee is a 21st century solution that can really better support demand management at peak times through value pricing, as Jana was talking about. It's also much easier to include pollution surcharges to better reflect environmental impacts. And it's a much better tool for addressing equity. It allows you to do things like offer free or discounted miles for certain kinds of workers, certain kinds of drivers, certain use cases in a way that you can't with the gas tax. So we've been a big supporter of transitioning the way we pay for transportation to a 21st century system. Unfortunately, the legislation that passed that created a road user charge here in Oregon has none of the features I just talked about, and frankly is the worst possible version of this idea. It punishes only electric and plug-in hybrid vehicles. It doesn't have those pollution elements. It doesn't have those equity elements. And the way that the fees are calculated is also fundamentally flawed. So would really encourage this group, again, if we're looking at all of the state's goals, we need to amend that program to include all vehicles, to set the fees equitably, to include those kind of pollution surcharges that we're talking about. And we can talk in more detail about what that would look like. But I think otherwise, we're going to see the state going backwards on electric vehicle adoption without gaining any of the benefits of this innovative, more forward-looking way of paying for transportation. So that's one big area. That's probably the hardest one. So that's the good news. The second one is that we need to fund and stabilize the incentive programs that we have. Oregon has some of the best programs in the country, including, I'm biased because we helped design it, but Oregon has one of the best electric vehicle rebates in the country. It includes a triple rebate for income qualifying drivers. It has been tremendously popular. It's one of, going back to Jana's point, you know, transportation is not just the biggest, fastest growing, most complicated source of greenhouse gas emissions. It's the second highest household expense. Virtually every family, it's the second highest expense. Most Oregonians depend on cars to get where they're going. And so the rebates that we have for electric vehicles has not only been one of the most impactful climate policies we have, it's done more to put money in the pockets of working Oregonians to address the climate crisis and help reduce household costs than virtually any other climate policy in the state. However, it's been so underfunded that it's now typically open for just a couple of months out of each year, which, as you can imagine, is really problematic when you're trying to build the market. And it's especially problematic for low-income drivers. When their car breaks down, they can't wait 6 months until the rebate window opens. They've got to replace that vehicle right away. Similarly, Oregon has a great community charging rebate program that puts charging in rural areas, at multifamily housing, at other kind of hard to reach areas. It has programs for heavy duty trucks and charging infrastructure. But all of these programs have been funded with one-time money. Much of it came from a federal grant under the previous administration. They've been small kind of pilot programs, and they've all been dramatically oversubscribed, which again shows the demand and the desire of Oregonians to move in this direction, but the need for funding. So Oregon needs to get serious about providing substantial and sustained funding for these programs, and also to right size the program. I will say, the commission made, Environmental Quality Commission made some changes to the rebate program, which we support under the circumstances, to kind of right size it. So if we don't have the money, let's at least try and make this program more predictable, more useful to folks, so that it's not kind of a stop-start situation. Third area is really investing in market transformation. We've seen this in the energy utility space. It's not just about incentives and rebates and financial barriers. There's a whole bunch of information and other kinds of barriers that need to be overcome that we have not been investing in. So Oregon really needs to invest in technical assistance, education, and outreach to support these transitions. And the good news is this can be a really high bang for the buck. This is relatively cheap compared to those hard costs of infrastructure and vehicles. Colorado is a great model here. They've been leading in the implementation of these kinds of programs, and they're now the #1 state for EV sales as a percentage of new car sales. What am I talking about? So these are programs like consumer outreach. Just for starters, many Oregonians have still never driven an electric car. They're confused by misinformation that's out there and headlines that they see. One of the most Googled terms is still, can I take my electric car through a car wash? Honest to God. So we need a lot more brand neutral ride and drives and experiential events where people can see and touch and feel the technology. But we also should have a more professional consumer engagement campaign. One I would point you to is called Electric for All. Well, sorry, electricforall.org is a good example of that. Another example of these kinds of programs is for apartment managers and employers. Again, they don't necessarily know. If you're an apartment manager, you probably don't wake up in the morning thinking about how to provide charging to your residents. If you're an employer, you might realize, oh, I should probably provide a bike rack, but you don't necessarily think about how do you ensure that your workers can charge up at work if they need to. So there are good platforms and tools out there for that. Local governments is another example. They have a key role to play in permitting charging and planning for charging at the curbside in their right of way. And again, the good news is that there are programs and tools out there. We don't have to recreate the wheel, but somebody needs to support and fund that kind of brand neutral programming. Last example I'll give is really technical assistance for fleets. Most fleets, again, especially smaller fleets, where most of the vehicles are found, they don't know where to begin with making a transition. There's been some great initiatives and platforms there, like the Breaking Barriers Collaborative here in the region, but they're really scraping money together from philanthropy and other sources and have not received a lot of public support. And then the last point I would suggest is the states that have been most successful in this transition also have a really effective coordination effort across state agencies but also across other key stakeholders like local governments, environmental groups, community-based organizations, auto dealers. This is not just about putting a different drivetrain under the hood. This is really a different business model. And Oregon had been a leader in this work way back when I started in this work at Drive Oregon back in 2011. Oregon was a leader in bringing the stakeholders together and doing this kind of coordination, and it's not anymore. So we had something called the Oregon Zero Emission Vehicle Interagency Working Group, or ZEVIWIG. I can honestly say I have no idea whether it's even still meeting. It turned into kind of just a government-only entity, but that kind of public coordination across agencies and across stakeholders is something that Oregon historically has been really good at. And I'd like to see us lead on that again, because in the absence of that, we really wind up with policies at cross purposes. And I could give you lots of examples, but I won't, just to keep it positive. And the last thing I'll say on that note is, in the spirit of coordination, one of the things we do is organize a big multi-stakeholder conference every year called the Roadmap Conference. Some of you may have attended it when it was here in Oregon for many years. It's been in Detroit the last couple of years, and it's going to be in Seattle this September. So if you really want to geek out on all things electric transportation, encourage you to hop the train, join us up there September 13th through 15th, and I'll drop the link in the chat. But with that, I want to hand it over to Tim, and then we'll come back and get into discussion. Tim, are you with us?
I am with us, Jeff. How are you?
All right.
Thank you very
All
much.
yours.
Really appreciate that. Chair McDonald, members of the commission, thanks very much for the chance to speak about transportation this morning. Again, my name is Tim Miller. I'm the Director of Oregon Business for Climate. And Jeff, thanks for inviting me to participate this morning. I also serve on the Governor's Advisory Council on data centers, as well as on the Oregon Investment Council. First off, who is Oregon Business for Climate? We're a statewide group of businesses that see the need to address climate change. We know Oregon can and must do more to address climate change, and that businesses can play a significant role. And frankly, there is a business case for doing so. We're really about addressing, there's an imperative for addressing climate change, and there's an opportunity in doing so. Let me just quickly preview what I'll cover. And of course, I'm going to be touching on some themes that Jana and Jeff both touched on, but I'll bring it from a business perspective. First one is that the business and the economic rationale for electrification of vehicles and transportation is here. And we're almost there in terms of the business case being clear, but we need investments to accelerate that transition. That's point one. Point two, we'll be talking about prioritizing our transportation investments, not just about more lanes, but about smart investments and a fixed at first approach, which you've heard about. And then the third point I'll make is our need to advance, make progress on a smart road user charge or road user fee, as Jeff described, and congestion pricing. So I'll get into those three themes and look forward to the discussion after this. Again, first off, the business case is getting there for electric vehicles. We've seen more and more cost competitive vehicles at a purchase price level. And upcoming even in the Class 8 category, Tesla has a vehicle coming out that'll be close to price parity. And then when you consider the operational savings, the economics get really good. Zero emission vehicle fleets see up to 40% lower maintenance costs and obviously much lower fueling costs. A diesel truck fuels at 50 to 70 cents per mile. And of course, that's gone way up now that gas or diesel is at $6 a gallon. Versus electric semi trucks can operate in the 15 to 25 cents a mile range. So huge difference there. These efficiencies can save $15,000 to $25,000 or more per vehicle over their life. And that also factors in the businesses need to have predictability in their costs. And obviously, as we heard previously, electric costs are not nearly as volatile as fossil-based costs, as we're experiencing right now with the activity in Iran. We, in fact, just based on this most recent conflict, nationally, we're experiencing $21 billion of increased gas costs, $17 billion of increased diesel costs, and that's showing up as over $160 a month in household costs. So we need to get away from this volatile fuel and onto less expensive electricity, and we're close to price parity at the vehicle level. From a broader level, thinking about the energy sector, we now know that the economics are there such that clean energy is cheaper to build and faster to build. And it's the solution when we can build renewables. Of course, there are siting and planning and transmission and all kinds of issues to making that happen. But at the cost level, these solutions are cheaper. And at the energy sector level, transportation electrification can help better utilize, more fully utilize our electric system, and thereby bring down the costs per kilowatt hour for everyone. We're seeing real affordability challenges in energy, but if we can use electrification more broadly across our economy, we can spread those costs and bring rates down, or at least maintain rates for everyone. So huge rationale there from both a business cost and an energy cost perspective. And then, of course, there's the local economy consideration. When we buy fossil-based fuels, our money goes right out the door. Nearly $5 billion a year goes out of the state for oil and for gas and diesel in Oregon. And imagine what we can do if we kept those dollars in the state and those dollars circulate up and down Main Street and create more jobs and purchasing power for everyone and just boost our overall economy. So clear rationale there from an economic standpoint, both at the sort of microeconomic level and inside a business and the broader economic level. The economics are there. And we have a view of this at Oregon Business for Climate as we are partnering, as Jeff mentioned, with other leading Northwest organizations to run something called the Breaking Barriers Collaborative. This gives us a view into what businesses are thinking about. It's a program that helps businesses decarbonize their fleets. Basically an accelerator program, a 12-week program to get folks spun up on what the opportunities are, educate them on the utility options, incentives, fleet planning, all that. So we have companies in Oregon who are making progress on this or wanting to make progress on this. City of Roses Disposal and Recycling has a Class 8 truck, and they have some pickups. Grand Central has a plan to electrify more of their fleet. Skanska has EVs and will only be buying electrics going forward. DeSantis Landscape has light-duty trucks for their team. Neil Kelly has EVs. New Seasons has been through the accelerator and has a plan and wants to move forward on this, as has Organically Grown. It's a company that does logistics for produce coming out of our great agricultural sector, moving those around the state. They've got about 50 Class 8 trucks. They would like to move toward electrifying those. They've been through this program. The desire is there, the economics are there, but in this case, plain old textbook economics isn't going to drive the fast transition we need. As Jeff and Jana both mentioned, our incentives are not there to help accelerate this. You can do the math and show someone that it works, but unless you've got a good financing program or help to get in charging infrastructure in their lot where their trucks come back to every night, and some hand-holding and technical support, as Jeff mentioned, we're not getting there. We need to have incentives in place. We need to figure out how to fund those incentives, whether that's through congestion pricing or other fees, or creating financing programs to help folks handle the upfront cost. So from a policy standpoint, we need to make progress on this. And I know budgets are terrible, so we need to figure out what the pay-fors are for these things, as well as financing solutions. So that's point one. Point two about transportation investments. Again, we're advocating for smart investments and a fix-it-first approach. You heard a little bit about this, but it's entirely natural as if you're a company who's got folks trying to move your product up and down the freeways in our state. It's entirely natural when you're stuck in traffic to look and say, gosh, I wish there were another lane so we could move this traffic along. But as you heard previously, too often, and the studies show, that just induces more demand and moves that bottleneck 2 miles on down the road. It's not the solution. And I get that it's a natural appearing solution, but it's not. We need to get more of those vehicles off the road. We need to make our investments in walking and biking and transit and the chargers that can help with EVs and other vehicles, but getting them off the road would be a critical investment consideration for our transportation sector. And these investments create more jobs than just building more roads. And studies have found that you can create 31% more jobs than doing road construction if you do repair and you create bike and trail and alternate routes and transit and other solutions. And that also delivers benefits faster. We know it takes a really long time to free up roads by building more lanes versus making some of these other investments. So big opportunity to rethink how we prioritize our investments in the transportation sector. And then a basic fix and first approach also, as we build more stuff and new stuff, that's just more that we need to maintain, and we're not sufficiently maintaining our current roads and bridges. Poor road conditions raise costs then for households and businesses and thrash our vehicles and our delivery vehicles, and freight operators experience this as well. So we should maintain what we have before we build out more and figure out how to reduce the VMT on those heavily loaded roads. The third main point here is, again, as you heard from Jana and Jeff, thinking about road user charges and congestion pricing. We need to fix our road user charge. Jeff mentioned the ways that our current RUC does not work, but it could if we redesign it. If it included all vehicles, if it had equity programs built into it, so it doesn't become a regressive program, and if it accesses the externalities from transportation, pollution charges, and other things, we could be really smart about this and create resources for some of the incentives and investments that I spoke about earlier. That's the road user charge. And then if we get really smart, we can think about how to do that on a congestion basis and also help relieve those roads so that, from my perspective, businesses can move their goods up and down our roads more efficiently, save time, save money, have better jobs for everyone, reduce health impacts, reduce impacts on neighboring communities from vehicles being on those roads too long. So lots of opportunities here, and I really appreciate the time and look to you all as a fact-based group trying to look at the information here, doing what you can to move this kind of information into your friends and colleagues in the legislature and in other public dialogues to advance these policy solutions. Thanks very much for a chance to talk, and look forward to a little discussion.
So some great questions in the chat. Hopefully you saved some live, because I think we still have some time here.
We do. Yeah, thank you. And, I will say years ago, I hosted a business leaders convening, and congestion pricing and transportation was a big piece for them. So appreciate your support for that. Hey, Commissioner Lasitinsky.
Thanks for the wonderful presentation. I really appreciate how balanced it was, both between the need to electrify transportation and the need to reduce VMT. Just wanted to make a couple quick notes and then ask a couple questions. One is, with our current fossil fuel-based transportation system, it's really not feasible for us to, extract the fuel and refine it, in our own backyards. It's not really a feasible strategy. However, it is possible with an electric vehicle transportation fleet to actually generate your own fuel at virtually, at a very low cost. So that's comes in the form of solar panels. So both businesses and individuals are able to take advantage of that. The other point I wanted to make is that local governments, I work for a local government, do need technical assistance and help in developing fleet decarbonization strategies. We have 6,000 employees at Multnomah County. Many of them will experience their first ride in an EV at work. And that helps them learn about and trust the technology. I took the Chevy Bolt up to a conference in Tacoma, Washington this week, and it worked great. Actually, the hotel had free charging, so it really didn't cost the county all that much to get me up and back. And of course, I carpooled with a colleague, so that was even better. The other thing couple of things I'd love to hear you talk about. Jeff, you mentioned both in the chat and in your comments about some of the policy pieces that are needed to develop some of the vehicle to grid or vehicle to home type of and smart charging policies. I'd love to hear more about that. We're actually in the process of building out a solar powered microgrid with vehicle backup charging at one of our facilities. And what we have to do is actually install a transfer switch and buy a vehicle that can plug into it, and we can't just use the charger plug to have two-way directionality. So I'd love to hear more about what the barriers are there. I also think we're really underhyping and underselling level 1 charging. That's just basically basic plugs. I'd love to hear if there's any developments on smart plugs that can help us, like a local government, for example, overcome the fiscal barrier of the upfront cost for deploying charging by utilizing level 1 chargers, and ideally being able to still monetize the clean fuel credits to further buy down those costs. I've heard that there are some potential smart plug solutions out there for that. But even if not, I think that level 1 is a promising solution given the low mileage that most fleets in public fleets travel in a day or a week. And then finally, I'd love to hear more about trucking. You mentioned some of the success of Titan Freight, but I guess I'm more interested in what the state can be doing to facilitate truck charging at key points within the freight system. So a truck being able to go between Portland and Seattle, or the Port of Tacoma and the Port of Seattle and come down to Portland, or go from Portland to Hood River, or out to the Dows, and then be able to recharge. I know it's really exciting, the 400-mile range Tesla freight truck, but we know freight movement is both a huge source of emissions and a huge source of diesel pollution in our state. And electrifying trucking seems like it ought to be a really high priority for us. So I'd love to hear. So that the three were level 1 charging, assistance to local governments. Some of the what can we do to incentivize smart vehicle technology? Should that be part of this report that was talked about today? And then finally, the trucking aspect of it. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll try and I could take a first run at this and try and be quick, and happy to talk more offline too, John. So first of all, I would say absolutely. And for folks who are not EV nerds, so level 1 is just a wall plug. You can plug any electric car into any wall outlet. So when people ask me, where's the charging infrastructure, I start pointing at outlets. It's everywhere. And that will give you, depending on your car and all the other variables, it'll probably give you 20 or 30 miles a day at least, which is what the average Oregonian drives in a day. So it is underrated as a solution. There's fancier versions of that. For example, best installation that I cite all the time, if you go to the Port of Portland, to the airport long-term parking, a lot of airports messed this up and put in a bunch of expensive level 2 chargers that will fill up your car in 4 hours. Nobody parks at the airport for 4 hours. So Port of Portland did this really well. They put in a whole bunch of level 1 outlets in the long-term economy lot. Costs almost nothing in electricity. Great solution if you're there for a few days. So absolutely, we should be encouraging more of that. We talk about that a lot with apartments and workplaces. And there are technologies, without going too far into weeds, to your point about smart plug, we basically, like, let's say you want to send somebody, a county employee, home with an electric car and let them charge at home, the way to use a smart cord that would then actually track and allow you to pay for that charging. And I believe that technology might, you probably shouldn't quote me on this, but there is probably a way to get good enough data for clean fuels, and we could follow up about that offline. On the managed charging vehicle to grid, another great point, trying to be quick. people have been excited for 15 years about vehicle to grid, meaning, oh, it's a giant moving battery. We're already paying for the energy storage that we need to get more renewables on the grid. We just need to use the batteries we're already paying for that are in people's vehicles. And people can fill up their car at night when we have all this extra wind and hydro, and then they can put that back onto the grid during the day. But and the technology there is not really the hard part. We've had a lot of demonstration projects. So yeah, you can put energy in and out of the car. The challenge is the business model and how do you scale it? Historically, automakers have been resistant to people using car batteries that way because it could degrade the battery and it's under warranty by the automaker. That's getting better. There's been some other challenges, but the big thing is, how do you create a program that people are willing to sign up for and that utilities are willing to pay for and that regulators are willing to let them pay for? And that's coming. But before you even get to that, the managed charging of just, hey, I'll plug my car in when I get home at 5 o'clock, but I don't care when and how fast it charges as long as it's ready in the morning when I leave. So you can get, as it's classic, you can get 80% of the benefit for 20% of the hassle by just saying, okay, plug your car in when you get home, but we're not going to charge it until midnight. And in fact, we're going to charge it in a dynamic way as we have the extra capacity. Because what we found out early on is if you say it's cheaper to charge after midnight, guess what? All the cars start charging at 12:01. Also not good. So we've solved a lot of those problems, but it's not yet seamless as you're finding with your project. It still takes a lot of work. So we could probably do a whole nother session on that. And I love the idea of including kind of vehicles as a distributed energy resource in this advanced technology report if folks are interested in that. And then very quickly on trucking, what I'll say is kudos to DOT, since I picked on folks earlier about coordination. I should say the state has done a lot of things right. And one of the things the state did really well was going after the federal money when it was available. And the state was able to secure and even more amazingly defend a big federal grant to build out heavy duty charging along I-5 from California to the Canadian border. And so that project is moving forward to put some heavy duty charging depots out there. I think beyond that, these are expensive, but the state could do a lot in terms of coordination among the stakeholders, because it's a classic chicken and egg where there's a lot of companies that will build those fast charging depots for multiple users, but they need to make sure that there's enough users to pay for it. The users don't want to buy the trucks until they know there's a place to charge them. So that kind of coordination and bringing folks together role is really important. The last thing I'll say about trucks is we think about the long distance Class 8, great big semis, huge opportunity in sort of the Class 2 to Class 6, things like delivery vans, panel vans that electricians drive, refrigerated trucks. So we don't have to go all the way to the long duty Class 8s. There's a whole ton of vehicles that are used more locally where we could do a lot of good, and it's just very compelling economics. But I just monopolized that answer. So Jana or Tim, anything you want to add to any of those?
Well, I'm seeing 3 more comments from the commission, so
we should keep going.
Well, maybe just one quick thing to the chicken and the egg, that Oregon did do a one-time incentive pot for medium and heavy duty vehicles, $17 million, $12.5 million of that is already dedicated. It's an oversubscribed program and it's inadequate. And so investing in the vehicle side as well as the charging is going to be really important going forward.
Senator Golden, you were number 1 and then you dropped off.
Yeah, I don't know what's happening with my electronic hand. Thank you. I really enjoyed this presentation. I really appreciate it. It's great to see Jeff Allen after a whole lot of years. Hello, Jeff. And I wanted to respond to something you said, and I hope this doesn't take us too far off track, but you talked about how oversubscribed some of our programs are, and said it's really time for Oregon to get serious about investing in, again, in EV investment. And you're right, that's correct. And it's extremely hard to see how that's going to happen in the next few biennia, I think. And this is a much, much larger issue. I'm really attuned to it because most of my meetings in the last couple, 3 weeks has been dealing with the funding crisis at Southern Oregon University. And there's, it's really caught fire around the state. There, all of our higher ed institutions are suffering. And it is a fact that we are 47th right now in per student spending on higher education. And that's number two. I could go down to the list to 10 or 12. My passion is wildfire, and I think we're really cruising for a bruise, and maybe this summer or later because of our underinvestment. So this is not just to sort of rain on anybody's parade. It's to suggest, and this is a sermon I hear myself giving a lot when people are advocating more investment. The things that we want are not going to happen with our current revenue system. They just aren't. It's broken. Now, top reason I would say, most obvious one, is our kicker, but there's more than that. So the point I want to make is, I get to meet a lot of people advocating for a better Oregon and a better future for Oregonians across the spectrum of issues. And they are making fiscal asks, usually specific ones, that I want to say yes to. And by and large, we're saying no and no and no. And the visions are there and the plans are there. So what I'm asking everyone who's investing time in a better Oregon and a better future for Oregonians is that, aside from their area of passion, that they start getting involved in a broader conversation about fixing Oregon's revenue system. Because we're going to have really stimulating conversations about all kinds of things and won't move forward on them until and unless that happens. So everybody kind of knows that, but they go, well, my thing is children protection. My thing is climate. My thing is wildfire. That's what I'm working on. We all have to come together to work on changing Oregon's finances.
Yeah, I'm really thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. And I want to say, just building on something I think you said, John, earlier, Oregon spends something like, I think last I checked, $5 billion a year on gas and diesel. And that money leaves the state instantly and does us nothing. There's a study done long ago in California that said every dollar you can shift in California out of gas into any other kind of spending creates 12 times more jobs. And California actually does have some oil production. Oregon has zero. So we actually did a study, again, a decade or more ago, that said every electric vehicle that we bring on the roads in Oregon generates something like $1,500 in additional tax revenue over the life of the vehicle. Because, again, it's keeping that money local, it circulates in the economy. So I'd just say, first of all, transportation electrification and actually multimodal transportation. Back in the day, they used to refer to the second paycheck that Oregonians get. And I think somebody did the study that said the fact that Portlanders drive 10 fewer miles a day adds up to several $1,000s or more in equivalent income for them. So first of all, I'd say this is an economic development strategy at some level. The second, I think I'd say, just to be a little controversial, and I don't want to blow this up, but I'll say it's all about trade-offs. And I'm, again, just to be controversial for a minute, we've spent 50 years transitioning towards renewables and energy efficiency and investing hundreds of millions of dollars in that. Maybe it's time that we redirect some of those investments into the next challenge. Because it seems to me we are over-indexing on efficiency and renewable investments compared to what we're investing in transportation. So as we think about having to make hard trade-offs, I will just put that out there for you all to discuss amongst yourselves.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Commissioner Apter, and then I think we need to do a time check.
Thank you. I'll try to be brief. First, just want to echo appreciation for our presenters. I think clearly, if there's one takeaway from all of your remarks, it's the importance of reaching and sustaining this cost parity and ensuring equitable and affordable access to electric vehicles and trucks. And given changes in federal policy and the elimination of federal incentives, just the ever important role of the state in ensuring these investments and ensuring families and businesses can access all of these benefits that come with clean vehicle and truck adoption. So my question is in part building on Senator Golden's question, which is what is that funding gap for Oregon's existing successful EV and medium heavy duty vehicle and charging programs, and beyond broader revenue reform. What are some of the more promising funding or financing the pay for mechanisms that the state could consider to sustain and scale these investments? And the other piece I'm thinking about is the Governor Kotek's transportation vision work group. Jeff, you called out trade-offs. That work group is really focused on examining the state's funding challenges and priorities and trade-offs around transportation ahead of the 2027 session, and really focused on affordability, accountability, safety, and economic vitality, which are all issues that, as we've heard today, intersect directly with transportation electrification. So I'm curious how you all see this conversation, these incentive needs fitting into that work group and broader conversations.
Senator Golden, do you want to respond directly? Or hold off?
To other revenue strategies, other funding strategies? Is that the question? Did you direct that to me, Nora? Or were you directing? Jeff Allen.
Wasn't intending to put you on the spot, Senator Golden. I thought maybe the panelists would have an idea, and I also see Rep. Gamba has his hand raised as well. And
I got a ton of ideas for raising money that aren't too relevant to this conversation, but the point is some way we have to do it.
Great. All right. Well, then Commissioner Thorndike.
Yeah, I guess it's sort of relevant to that. I'm just saying from a perspective of a small manufacturer, and is just the importance of overcoming that cash flow kind of issue to be able to make the investments. I mean, I think everybody knows that, yes, it would make sense to do that. It would be great. But just as a practical matter, I'd say the vast majority of small businesses in Oregon have cash flow issues more than anything else. So one avenue, and I don't know how the state could necessarily encourage it or not, but is the financing mechanisms that would involve either for-profit or other nonprofit folks who basically would be able to finance the acquisitions and get paid back from the savings, over a period of time. I know that some of that has existed on a residential kind of model before for electrification, but just something that overcomes that hurdle of the amount of money it takes to get a new truck. I mean, that's whatever kind of truck it is, but at least that maybe even incentivize going towards electrical and going towards utilizing your property to use more electrical generation and stuff. If you can overcome that cash flow thing, you don't even really need the immediate payback to the business. They can do it and stay even. So that's just another kind of getting around Senator Golden's absolutely correct observation that, there's not going to be a golden pot of money, coming from state resources. So what can we do to encourage a broader picture? That's it.
Yes, Commissioner Thorndike.
Tim Miller.
Yeah, Commissioner Thorndike, thank you for that comment. And there are, we had a proposal last session, and we'll have a proposal hopefully this coming session to help create a financing mechanism that could be used for things like that. So totally agree. I mentioned financing in my remarks as well, that that needs to be more available. It probably needs to be designed in a way that is aware of the risks and the challenges, and it probably needs to be a nonprofit oriented or a low cost of capital solution. So, and then it needs to be, in my view, it needs to be wrapped in some technical assistance, like Jeff and Jana mentioned, because even though you see the economics, there are 5 of your colleagues who aren't doing the spreadsheets and aren't looking at the math, and somebody could help them with the math. So totally agree.
Thanks.
Commissioner Thorndike. Do you have another comment? Okay. Representative Gamba.
Thank you. First, I want to fully and loudly second Senator Golden's assertion that until we fix our revenue system, we're not going to be able to fix much of any of the other problems we have anytime real soon. But I want to hone in a little bit on the concept of vehicle to grid and what we need at the state level in order to facilitate that. I'm assuming something like VPPs are the big missing piece of that opportunity. Am I wrong in that assumption?
Well, I can make this up. Yeah, I think virtual power plants are definitely part of it. And basically, how do you build a program at scale that utilities can draw on and build the confidence at the utility that will be there? Utility planners tend to be much more comfortable turning on a switch for a power plant than turning on a switch for demand response, to put it mildly. And ditto regulators, right? So that is a big part of it. And I guess I would say there were some comments in the chat about a school bus project up in the gorge that we're also a part of. It's a lot easier to do this with large vehicles and fleet vehicles than it is to do it with individually owned personal cars. You really have to get a large number of those personal cars. The last thing I'll say, again, not to geek out too much on utility issues, but with this group, you probably appreciate it. What we're finding is the benefits of this, where they're really the biggest, is not so much in the generation side, it's the distribution and transmission side. And the value of demand response from an EV at the distribution level can be huge if you've got a transformer that otherwise is going to need to be replaced, that you can avoid having to replace. So a lot of what we're seeing right now that's really exciting, and people are using AI and other technologies to do this, is to really drill down to say, no, Jeff, your EV being on managed charging is worth 10 times as much as your neighbor's EV 2 doors down. So how do we reflect that and monetize that and deliver a program to you to capture that value?
Thanks.
Sharon.
Yeah, I would just jump in on the VPP question on sort of the back end, the utility end, the capacity to manage, any distributed energy resource to sort of shave peaks and reduce the amount of, fossil fuel or other backup capacity we need on the system and integrate renewables is there. It's, it's a question of sort of customer adoption of the kind of smart chargers that we need to be able to talk to the system. We have a smart charging program where customers who have chargers that can work on the system, allow us to turn them down or pause their charging during peak demand periods. And so it's a combination of sort of both, behavioral changes, customer adoption, which of course is also, responsive to incentive programs, but also just sort of making sure the technology is out there in a way that can really facilitate those byway energy flows with those vehicles. I think the gold standard everybody wants to see someday is for the battery itself to become a resource on the system, not just sort of how we time the customer's charging to sort of, minimize impacts on the grid, but, can we actually access the batteries as form of battery storage integrated into the grid? And that technology isn't quite there yet in a way that, would be, we would see adoption at scale, but that's the hope.
Yeah, anything we can do to help with education would be great. I could learn more.
Well, Odo's website on EV vehicles and programs is enormously helpful in that regard. We hear a lot of really positive feedback from our customers.
Awesome. Okay. And there are a lot of really great notes in the chat. I think we had a more active chat than many of our meetings before. So appreciate everybody focusing on that. Okay, next topic.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Hong Van Nguyen, and I coordinate and am the policy analyst for the Oregon Environmental Justice Council. I will be co-presenting this presentation with my colleague, Eric Main. And in this presentation, we're hoping to provide a high-level introduction of the Environmental Justice Mapping Tool, talk about what we see will be in it, and also talk about how it could be used by Oregon communities. If we could go to the next slide, please.
Maybe just a quick introduction or comment. One of the things we put in our roadmap in 2023 was the importance of trying to make sure we were addressing environmental justice. So this is something we've been interested in seeing. And I'm super excited about the fact that we get to hear about what it is and when we might be able to start using it. So thank you. It's, I think, a really important part of what we need to do.
Thank you so much, Chair McDonald, and we really appreciate the opportunity to present to the Climate Action Commission. All right, so we want to start with introducing a snapshot of the decision makers for the Environmental Justice Mapping Tool. Our chair is Aparna Rajagopal, who comes from us from Eugene, Oregon, and she brings her lived experience as a South Asian American and her commitment to just governance and statewide policy conversations. And through a 20 plus year career path that's been anything but linear, she has braided together science, technology, law, and education to nurture thriving communities and ecosystems. Next slide, please. Our vice chair is Jerisha Brannon. She is an environmental engineer and passionate about environmental justice, civil engagement, and diversity STEM fields, and is actively involved in her community, having served in a variety of leadership roles for nonprofits, community boards such as the National Society for Black Engineers, Portland Professionals, the State Environmental Justice Council, of course, and Multnomah County's Chartered Review Community, Metro Parks and Equity Advisory Committee, and more. Another thing that we're hoping with this presentation is we can develop some relationship building between the Environmental Justice Council and Climate Action Commission. Next slide, please. So the Environmental Justice Council is involved with a lot of different things, but there's sometimes some confusion with their role. They are a governor's council and all the members are appointed to the governor. They advise the governor and state agencies on environmental justice, and they are responsible for developing the Environmental Justice Mapping Tool. They are not served by a state agency. I am their advisor, but they are also reporting to the governor directly, and they also do not have an advisory capacity or an advocacy capacity. They are just advisory. So when it comes to the work of, budgets and such, they partner with the Racial Justice Council and the Oregon Advocacy Commissions. Next slide, please. All right, so the process of getting a mapping tool for environmental justice in Oregon has been a really long-term effort of Oregon advocates. And when House Bill 4077 passed in 2022, it created an initial funding structure for development that is only for version 1. The good news is it did provide an ongoing appropriation for state agency staff support, which includes the EJC Policy and Program Coordinator, which is my position, that is appropriate on an ongoing basis, as well as funding for an OHA EJ mapping lead, who is Eric Main, who will be presenting a little bit later. There's also some IT support from DAS that is ongoing appropriated. There is also short-term appropriation from our academic partners, Portland State University Population Research Center. Their role in the project is they are assisting with the development of the indexes. And then we also have temporary support from Oregon State University Institute for Natural Resources. They will be doing the look and feel of the tool and hosting the tool in Oregon Explorer. When it comes to tribal engagement and tribal mapping development, that was not scoped in this version of the mapping tool. Next slide, please. So some key features that are being developed, which some are actually quite unique to Oregon. The first thing that we want to amplify is that the Oregon's Environmental Justice Mapping Tool will give the ability to find the most vulnerable communities in Oregon from a statewide basis, which is pretty standard for state mapping tools. But what's unique to Oregon is there's also going to be the ability to compare communities based on community characteristics, like coastal communities. We'll be able to compare coastal, remote to remote, rural to rural, small city to small city, and large city. The reason why this is going to be so beneficial is there are certain state programs that are more focused on rural communities or coastal communities, for instance. So in lieu of just using a statewide index to compare, they'll be able to compare like communities. It also prevents a criticism that has existed in many other state tools of a urban basis or a rural basis. So it gives the ability for folks to be able to compare based on what just makes the most sense for the program in question. There's also going to be environmental justice scoring to determine the most vulnerable communities. This scoring will be able to help state agencies highlight who in a programmatic perspective needs focus on. And there's also going to be decision support layers to provide additional community context. And a later feature, which hasn't been developed yet, but is scoped, is developing environmental justice reports. Next slide, please. All right. At this point, I'll be passing our presentation to Eric Main to cover more information about the technical aspects of the tool and why it is being developed. Eric?
Oh, thank you so much, Vaughn, and good morning, all. To the right of the screen is a definition from 2022 from Health and Human Services, definition of cumulative impacts. 2022 in some ways feels like a lifetime ago. So we all experience stressors from environmental exposures, social and economic factors, and health conditions that present challenges in our daily lives. Stressors include things like poor air and water quality, extreme weather events, financial challenges, pre-existing health conditions, and experiences with structural racism. As the number of stressors build, cumulative impacts multiply, contributing to adverse health effects. Next slide, please. So there's a lot of language or a lot of information in House Bill 4077 we're using to guide the development of the environmental justice mapping tool. A few examples include climate change risks, demographic and social factors, and characteristics of the built environment, including communities with limited infrastructure. We're also using language in the House bill that will help us avoid some of the lessons learned from other states, as Vaughn mentioned, that their tools bias urban communities or bias rural communities. The definition of environmental justice community identifies coastal, rural, and remote communities as environmental justice communities. So the language provides us with some flexibility in our approach. Next slide. So once again, as Vaughn mentioned, the environmental justice mapping tool will include 6 indexes, a statewide index, and indexes for large cities, small cities, coastal, remote, and rural communities. And this is really important because, when we look at particular indicators for environmental justice, and, if we were to focus in on climate change risks, climate change risk can look very different in coastal communities than it does in inland communities. So this really allows us to select indicators that are more appropriate for these community designations. Next slide. All right, so coastal communities are defined as census tracts whose population centers fall within the Department of Land Conservation and Development's coastal zone. Large city communities are tracts designated by the U.S. Department of Agriculture as metropolitan. Small city communities are tracts designated by USDA as micropolitan. Remote communities are tracts whose population center is more than a 30-minute drive from a metropolitan or micropolitan tract, and then all of the tracts are designated as rural communities. So with these metropolitan regions, it's really based on population density and where workers are commuting in, which census tracts workers are commuting in for work. Next slide, please. Environmental justice indicators will be organized in 2 domains. These are place-based and people-based. The place domain will include 4 subdomains. These are environmental exposures. So these are things that we're exposed to every day, like poor water quality or poor air quality. Environmental hazards. These are stressors that exist in our community, but may not result in a direct exposure every day. But it also includes things that might inhibit our ability to recreate, like impaired water bodies, where poses risks for swimming and fishing, climate change risks, and then the built environment. And this includes things like access to healthcare, food insecurity, access to high-speed internet. And there are 2 subdomains in the people domain, and those are human health. Those include things like health conditions, populations living with a disability, and then demographics and social factors. And there we get into things like income and educational attainment. Next slide. Okay, so the Environmental Justice Council adopted indicators for the statewide index this month, and next month they will adopt indicators for the community designation indexes. So the adopted indicators under environmental exposures include air quality index unhealthy days. That includes both particulate matter and ozone. Cancer risk from diesel particulate matter, cancer risk with diesel particulate matter removed, drinking water contaminants index, and that includes about a dozen contaminants as well as advisories, lead exposure risk, permitted air pollution sites, and transportation noise pollution. Under environmental hazards, we have earthquake risk. We are looking to make improvements to this indicator. Right now, it only includes shaking, but we'd really like to include communities that would experience greater isolation in case of Cascadia subduction zone earthquake, groundwater threats, hazardous material storage, hazardous waste sites, impaired water bodies, residential buildings in wildfire burn areas, and proximity to wastewater discharge. Under climate change risk, we're including extreme cold events, days with the maximum temperature above the 90th percentile that it allows us to track where extreme heat from climate change is increasing the most rapidly. Drought, fire weather index events, flood risk, our extreme heat indicator, which we will be revising once Oregon Health Authority finishes their thresholds for heat advisories, and wildfire risk. And then under the built environment, we're including access to healthcare. This is really distance to the nearest healthcare provider. Our community design index, and this includes walkability, impervious surface, and population density. And so as we see larger building footprints in our rural and remote communities, this will allow us to track how much those are contributing to urban heat island effect. Digital equity, that's the access to high-speed internet. Food insecurity, this includes the access to healthy food options, whether you live in a food desert. It also includes the percentage of households receiving SNAP benefits and also households without access to a vehicle. Park access, traffic injuries and fatalities, and urban tree canopy. Next slide, please. And for human health, we're tracking cancer mortality, diseases of the circulatory system, diabetes prevalence, frequent mental distress, populations living with a disability, preterm birth prevalence, and respiratory disease prevalence. And I will say that I think Oregon has the most comprehensive list of human health indicators for any of the tools that are available. And then for demographic and social factors, we're looking at population 65 and older living alone. That's our social isolation indicator. And I will say these age-based indicators, we relied really heavily on the language in House Bill 4077 in their selection. Next is educational attainment, populations or households living below 150% of the poverty level. Our inheritance proxy, which really is the ability to accumulate generational wealth. This indicator is very closely tied to Oregon's historic racism policies, limited English proficiency, vulnerable youth, and percentage of the population without health insurance. Next slide, please. So each inhabited census tract in Oregon will receive a statewide and community designation environmental justice index score between 1 and 100, with higher scores indicating higher risk for cumulative impacts. This fall, the Environmental Justice Council will set thresholds that will define census tracts as environmental justice communities. Thresholds will determine how many census tracts will be designated as environmental justice communities. The Environmental Justice Council will approach setting thresholds with caution. If the threshold is set too high, communities that deserve additional support could be overlooked. If the threshold is set too low, half the state could be designated as an environmental justice community, making the map less useful given the limited resources available. There will be communities where environmental justice scores fall slightly below environmental justice community thresholds. And so the Environmental Justice Council will provide guidance for how to address communities that are essentially on the bubble. Each subdomain and indicator will also be flagged if their score is above an environmental justice threshold. And should I pause for questions about this, because we're going to transition out of some of the mapping tool work? I'm wondering if this is a good time, Vaughn.
Actually, Eric, there is a question in the chat that might be good to respond to at this point.
Yeah,
This is
I was
totally
just gonna say, this is incredibly informative and dense, so people can ask questions. But also happy finish.
Okay, so the question is, will it effectively replace the EJ screening tool that the federal government removed last year? Yes. Yeah, so the intent all along was to create an Oregon-specific tool because the national tools, really don't get at the concerns, that Oregon deals with. It also allows us to create our own indicators. So for example, EJ Screen, it was a great tool, but it really doesn't track drinking water contaminants the way that we do. Where we're actually able to pull data from community water systems. And we borrowed that method from California. They have a similar indicator in CalEnviroScreen, which is a great tool.
I have a follow-up question.
Sure, absolutely. Oh, Gabriella,
someone else. Yeah.
I think Gabriella is next, and then I'll go to you, Commissioner Steckel. Oh, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, I was going to say I defer to the commissioner for the follow-up question. I have a little bit of context I wanted to share.
Well, go ahead. Here, you have the floor, and then we'll go to Commissioner Steckel.
Yeah, so I just wanted to build on what Eric said in terms of the difference. First of all, a lot more Oregon-specific data and information at a scale that is much more finely scaled than the national tools. But also, people are very familiar with either EJ Screen or the original version of CalEnviroScreen. That's very much more narrowly pollution burden focused. And hopefully you took away from all the different indexes and indicators that we're looking much more broadly. And these are a lot about the levers that we can use in our state to promote actually in the health context, life expectancy, but also just thriving and wellness. So it is central focus on environmental justice. This House Bill 4077 from 2022 was introduced by then Governor Brown, and it was a bill to modernize the Environmental Justice Council and give it this very important task. But it really has such broad potential, and I hope a lot of folks' ears were perking up from the fantastic discussion earlier about what needs to happen in our transportation sector. This is a tool that really supports that conversation and helps answer questions about what does it mean for people's lives to make investments and where those investments need to happen.
Yeah, thank you so much for the context, Gabriella, and she's exactly right. Most of the other tools are focused on those social and traditional environmental exposures and hazards indicator. I will say that the other states are beginning to gravitate over to climate change risks. I think we were one of the first to propose it, though. But Washington, Colorado, I think are including climate change risks, are looking very closely, and I know California has it under consideration. We're the first that include, and the only that include, the built environment. We're taking that head on. Other tools are including measures of the built environment, but we recognize the profound effects that it can have on health, and so we're taking it head on.
I guess
Thank you so much. Commissioner Steckel.
I'm just so excited about it. Thank you so much. And I guess one of the questions I have, it's definitely a focus on environmental and health. I know that there are other tools that also look at things like, community vitality and access to daycares or transit access, or those other kinds of the built environment, as well as kind of economic indicators. So whether it be median cost of homes or rents, other things that definitely have a significant impact on different community populations. So And maybe it's the legislation itself that really constrained you, but if not, I'm just curious about kind of the discussion about what to include and what not to include. And I know it's hard enough just to include a small number of metrics and indicators, and much more challenging to do a really wide one.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Commissioner. And it is a really important question. We initially had 117 indicators recommended by state and local agencies that participate in the methodology work group and greater staff. And we intentionally limited the number of indicators to include in the EJ mapping tool to no more than 7 per subdomain. So that's a total of 42. We were hoping to get it down even less than that. And the reason for that is that, when you, completely overload a composite index, it's really difficult to tease out what those major contributors are to environmental justice. And so that's why we set those limitations. When we evaluated the indicators, first of all, there's an indicator selection criteria, meaning there's got to be coverage for either the entire state or at least for the community designation that is being proposed for. Then we look at language in House Bill 4077 to see how closely the indicator aligns. Next we look at how closely correlated the indicators are with one another. If we have an indicator that is like 90% explained by another one, it doesn't make sense to keep both in the tool because we'd be double counting. We also look at the correlations with life expectancy at birth, and we take into account input we received from our community listening sessions. Those have been really helpful. And so all of that comes, and we also at the very end look at how the indicator will contribute to the index and whether there are policies that are realistic and be put in place to make conditions better. So we look at a wide variety of things before we make a final determination of whether to recommend an indicator for the index. And I will say this is version 1 of the tool. We recognize that there are some very important indicators that we would like to capture that either 1, were not recommended during the first round, or 2, the data is just not available yet. And a good one, that I can think of are, indicators of water insecurity. It's one of the top priorities of the Environmental Justice Council, and we'd like to do a better job of measuring water insecurity. I think we'd like to make improvements to food insecurity as well. And, there are several others that we're going to be looking at in the future for version 2. Yeah, so thank you for that question.
Vaughn?
Yes, thank you. So I also wanted to highlight that the Community Design Index indicator of the built environment subdomain, it has the opportunity to address a lot of the concerns of the Climate Action Commission because it's a combination of a few different data points. Eric, if you can chime in to share a little bit more of what's behind the scenes with that. But it really hits on what makes a community more accessible for people of multiple income levels. And that's also why I pasted in the chat the demographic and social factor subdomains, because it allows all these different subdomains to come together to be able to provide a holistic community context of what is coming together to create more vulnerability. So Eric, if you could explain a little more about the Community Design Index for this group.
Yeah, well, there was the Community Design Index. There were particular things that were in mind when that indicator was developed. And I think emerging concerns around data centers was definitely something that was in mind, and how they present themselves in are really more in our rural and remote communities and just how they contribute to, you know, see whether they are causing more harms than benefits. And so we're able to capture that. I suspect we'll be building on that community design index as versions of the tool emerge.
It's definitely a topic of interest to the commission. So thank you. Commissioner McNichol.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. This is really great and important work. And my question is your thoughts about how this work integrates with the climate protection program and the community climate investments that are intended in that program.
Yeah, so one of the intended uses of the tool is to identify those communities that are at higher risk. And so when there are policies that are implemented, I think it's important that you know, policies in funding as well are targeted towards communities at higher risk. So you know, even though there is not a requirement to use the environmental justice mapping tool in setting policies, because agencies have their own tools in place that do very specific things, and this is definitely not a one-size-fits-all tool. So the intent is for it to help inform decision making, and so I think, like, I'm really excited to see how agencies are going to be using the tool myself.
I'm just hopeful that DEQ will somehow integrate this into their CCI work that they're doing. So,
and I will leave that up to DEQ staff to respond.
Gabriella.
Yeah, so I'm not DEQ staff, obviously, but you know, the legislation put this under the direction of the EJ Council, and Yvonne can speak to this more if it's of interest and there's time, but they have made it clear that they intend that state agencies do use this tool. It'll be really important that it's used correctly. There's some tools in other places that were deployed in ways that turned into kind of automatic decision making that, for example, a larger census unit might have overall looked to have a certain set of characteristics, and so was passed by for investment when there was you know, a subpopulation that would have met all the criteria. So things like that. So it's going to be very important that it be used properly. But I think the Environmental Justice Council, which, you know, part of their mandate is to advise state agencies, that they will have a strong voice in asking agencies to consider how to use this tool. And I'm sorry, I was hands-free when I was driving and not able to look at anything. So just to clarify the timeline, by the end of this year, kind of the information gathering, the selection of the indexes, the indicators, all of that should be completed by the end of 2026. And it'll take about a year to actually stand up the tool itself. So hopefully by the end of 2027, the tool will be available for version 1. And so for folks who are seeing opportunities for strengthening it, that will be great. And I think as people use it, even more of those opportunities will become clear. So it's going to be super exciting once it is available to know that that's just version 1.
Thank you. Commissioner Vasatinsky.
Thank you. This is excellent. I'm really excited about the tool. I just want to offer just a couple of quick thoughts. One is that I think one aspect that we use a lot, or concept we use a lot here in Multnomah County, is adaptive capacity, which is the ability of people in the community to you know, put tools or protections in place to prevent them from being harmed by environmental hazards. And so that might look, it looks different for different hazards, of course, but you know, it might look like being able to leave if it's too hot and go to the coast, or being able to have an air conditioner, or you know, et cetera, et cetera. And you know, of course, you know, hopefully one of the outcomes of this tool is that we're better able to hone where people are lacking in adaptive capacity, so that we can direct resources more efficiently towards you know, limited public resources towards households, or you know, that might be struggling the most with that adaptive capacity. And then second of all, I just want to emphasize that the importance of tools like this, because, you know, in Multnomah County, we're doing, I put a link into our climate health indicators report. We're looking at, you know, syndromic surveillance to understand, you know, what kinds of, you know, how different kinds of people are being impacted by climate hazards. So, you know, for example, we know from our epidemiological work that like veterans turn out to be disproportionately impacted by high heat. So that's something that will help us going forward, you know that we need to reach out through veterans networks to let folks know that yeah, they need to take steps to protect themselves. We also see really high impacts of heat within the sporting community. So a lot of times otherwise healthy adults are ending up in the ER because they go for a run or participate in a organized run on a very hot day. And that's, you know, helping us to reach out to event organizers and say, like, what's your plan to handle the inevitable injuries, heat injuries that are going to occur, you know, from a sporting event that's taking place on a day with excessive heat. So these tools are really, really important for us going forward, because it gives us a glimpse of where we need to prioritize our efforts.
Yeah, and a quick response to that, if I might. That's one, the adaptive capacity measure is a great recommendation, and at the very least one, you know, for a decision support layer. And two, that Multnomah County Public Health staff have been a major participant in the recommendations every step of the way for the development of the tool.
Is the veteran impact homeless related impact, or separate?
No, we actually see that the majority of the high heat illness that occurs are people are housed. So we're not really, we're not sure, Chair, why that happens with the veteran community, but it's just, you know, one of those things that pops out when you're able to look at the data.
Thank you. Colin?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Are you able to at least hear me? If not, see me?
Yes.
Double logged in now, so I think I've got both separately.
We see you too, Colin. We hear you and see you.
Okay, I think you're seeing me through a separate login than you're hearing me, but regardless. I just wanted to follow up on the comments a moment ago about connecting this work with our climate protection program, and specifically the community climate investments. I really appreciate the hope that was expressed there, that we are able to make that connection, because I certainly share that. I know our team does as well. This is really potentially useful for that work, and helping us guide and direct the investments of that program to prioritize the benefits of our environmental justice communities that are expressly called out in the rules for that program. So certainly it's something we are tracking, and hope as well to be able to use this work to help us in that effort. That was it.
That's great. Thank you. Okay. Any other comments on this topic? Let's go to the next.
All right, so just to wrap our presentation, we were able, the last slide, everyone got a nice long look of, you know, the key milestones, and Gabrielle was able to share that this is expected to implement in December 2027. The good news is we hope that with the beta tool, which we're expecting to implement sometime earlier in 2027, we'd be able to solicit community feedback, and also feedback from really interested users. there is definitely an information gathering process that we are going to be continuing to do until implementation. And we hope that after implementation, we can open a public comment period to solicit feedback. If we can go to the next slide real quick. Okay, so the high-level primary users are going to be state agencies as listed in the statute. We expect secondary users to be local governments and other users that we have learned through various community engagements is community funders, community serving organizations, academia, emergency response, and community members. The statutory uses, which are in the next slide, just for everyone's reference. Next slide, please. Are to identify environmental justice communities affected by agency programs, conducting outreach and engagement activities with environmental justice communities to inform development, adoption, implementation, or enforcement of environmental laws, administrative rules or agency policies, establish measurable goals for reducing environmental health disparities, and prioritizing agency funding. One really important note for this section is this is meant to be a tool that is meant to supplement other agency program tools, policies, procedures, and laws. It's one data point. But if there are other considerations that aren't going to be needed to be able to determine who's going to get funding or who is going to get a particular agency resource. It is all at the discretion of the state agency that's making it. Also, for there is a particular section in House Bill 4077 that addresses permitting and enforcement. This mapping tool is not meant to be used primarily for any permitting or enforcement decision, though it is meant to inform with all of the other processes that are in place. So it is something that will be carefully considered by the Environmental Justice Council when it is time to develop the guidance to help stand up the tool to make this tool more useful and informative for potential users. Next slide, please. Here are the state agencies that are advised by the Environmental Justice Council. It's a very diverse group of 16. The agencies in asterisks, Department of Environmental Quality and Oregon Health Authority. These are the agencies who are lead in development of this tool. And that is the end of our presentation. Thank you so much, Chair McDonald, for inviting us. And I'm not sure if there's time for any additional questions or if we're in a good place right now.
You're muted, Chair. Chair McDonald, you're muted.
Sorry, I thought I unmuted. Anyway, I really appreciate this. This has been an important topic for the commission. So I really appreciate you presenting and would welcome other questions. Okay, hearing none, we can move on. Thank you again for presenting, and I really I think it's really important for the state of Oregon to be thinking about this, and I appreciate all the work you've done to help us do a good job of thinking of it. So thank you. Okay. So we're going to take a break. I think we're a little behind the times. But I think we've got enough time to make things work. But Jeff, if you want to check in with me about this and figure out how to best manage the time going forward.
Do we know if there's a bunch of public comment, how much public comment there is? That's the next item, right?
Yeah. Jeff, do you have any sense of that? We'll
we
figure that
don't,
out.
yeah, we don't have access to our list currently. We're going to do a hand raise for folks who
Okay.
are on the call. We know
Okay.
there's at least a couple.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we'll take a break and we'll come back at 11:33.
Chair McDonald. Hi, this is David Alloway. Can you hear me? You're on mute.
We can hear you,
Yes,
David.
sorry, we're a little behind. But
Yeah, no problem. We had
Perhaps.
planned about 21 minutes of delivery and you had 45 minutes on your agenda. So I think we can probably squeeze a minute or two out if we skip over a few details and you'll still have some time for some good discussion.
I like that you planned for 21 minutes.
Yeah, well, last time we checked,
That's
it was
very
21
precise.
minutes and 13 seconds the last time we tried it. So
Okay, good. Awesome. Yeah, I'm super excited about the next topic. I think we should one more minute and then we'll be back on.
Just saying, I think we'll get through this, okay?
Excellent. Thank you.
Get you back on schedule.
Okay. I believe we are scheduled back and I'm excited for the next topic, which is going to be talking about getting an update on the consumption-based emissions for Oregon. You know, I just want to recognize the fact that Oregon was one of the first states, or maybe the first state, to develop a consumption-based emissions inventory. We have sector-based emissions, which are mostly in-state and a little bit out of state related to generation of electricity. And then we have consumption-based, which is how, you know, what we impact in terms of what we consume here in the state. And then the newest one is our natural working lands emissions. So it's super exciting to get an update from DEQ on the consumption-based emissions and how that might fit into some of the recommendations we might want to make in our fall report. So I'll turn it over to David from DEQ and Amanda.
Thank you so much, Chair McDonald, members of the commission. Good morning. My name is David Allaway, and with me today is my colleague Amanda Ingmeyer. We've prepared some content to share with you today, and we're going to start with an update to Oregon's consumption-based emissions inventory. We will explore some examples of actions Oregon is taking and could take to reduce those emissions and some themes that emerge from that work. So let's start with the inventory. Next slide, please. As Chair McDonald said, Oregon accounts for its contribution to climate change through 3 separate inventories. And why 3 inventories? Because no single inventory by itself tells the complete story of how Oregon contributes to climate change. And by extension, and more importantly, each of the 3 inventories reveal different opportunities to reduce emissions. Back when the legislature adopted the state's greenhouse gas reduction goals in 2007, the sector-based inventory was the only inventory that existed. It was just called the inventory. And that sector-based inventory focuses on emissions that physically originate inside the state's borders, but it includes emissions from the generation of electricity used in state, regardless of where the electricity is generated. Because it is our use of electricity that is the root driver that causes those emissions to occur in the first place. So the consumption-based inventory takes that principle and applies it more broadly. It estimates the global emissions that arise from all of Oregon's consumption, not limited to electricity, but also including liquid fuels, which you heard a lot about this morning, as well as materials and services. Oregon was the first state to develop a consumption-based inventory at a subnational scale anywhere in North America, and we did so with the support of this commission. Thank you. And we've updated the inventory several times, and about 10 other states and many local governments have since followed our lead. Our most recent update will be published later this month, and it runs through calendar year 2023, and I will share a few highlights with you. Next slide, please. Oregon's consumption-based emissions are much larger than its sector-based emissions. These figures, updated for 2023, show the overlap between the 2 inventories. The sector-based inventory is the circle on the left. Consumption-based emissions are the circle on the right. The 2 inventories share some overlap. Unique to the sector-based inventory is the orange crescent on the left, 23 million metric tons of in-state emissions associated with the production of exports. The blue crescent on the right are emissions associated with imports into Oregon. And at 55 million metric tons, they're almost as large as the entire sector-based inventory itself. So put differently, the addition of this consumption-based inventory almost doubles the quantified estimate of Oregon's contribution to global climate change. Next slide, please. This graph shows how the two inventories have changed over time. In 1990, they were quite close together, but they've since diverged. The sector-based inventory peaked around the year 2000 and is now below that peak despite significant growth in population and economic activity. And one reason for that are the many important policies and programs informed by the sector-based inventory and adopted in the last few decades. In contrast, consumption-based emissions in blue have not received much attention, so perhaps it isn't surprising that they've grown largely unabated. The gap between the two inventories doubled between 1990 and 2005. It doubled again by 2015, and by 2023, consumption-based emissions were 32 million metric tons higher. Now, emissions in both inventories did fall between 2021 and 2023 by about 5% in both cases, and we hope that's not an anomaly, but rather the beginning of a longer-term trend, but only time will tell. If Oregon were like most other states and had only the sector-based inventory, we might be celebrating our success at delinking emissions from economic growth. And by one measure, we have done so. But that is partially because the emissions have simply shifted from one accounting ledger to another, due in part to the offshoring of production. We are winning a proverbial battle, but potentially losing the larger war. Even though the sector-based inventory peaked in 2000, our global carbon footprint has increased since that time. So why is that? This next graph, please, breaks the consumption-based inventory into four major categories: emissions from the direct consumption of electricity and fuels, that is, purchases by households and governments. In 2023, were only 9% and 20% of the state's consumption-based inventory, respectively. Electricity in particular has fallen over the years, but emissions from the consumption of materials has risen over time, and in 2023 clocked in at 47% of the state's total carbon footprint. This next graph breaks these emissions down even further into 16 broad categories, and for each 3 different life cycle stages. Vehicles and parts are the largest single contributor, and most of those emissions occur as a result of vehicles, shown in gray. The second largest source of consumption-based emissions are from food and beverage, and the vast majority of those emissions stem from production. I'll note that while people talk about reducing food waste as a climate strategy, the impacts of food disposal, such as methane emissions from landfills, shown in blue, is really relatively small. Most of the impacts of food and wasted food stem not from disposal, but rather production, including all of the resources and pollution that stem from producing food, including large amounts of food that regrettably nobody ever eats. This next graph is from 2021 and shows the average global carbon footprint for Oregon households in different income strata. And this is very important. It illustrates that lower income households, which are more vulnerable to the negative impacts of climate change, and they have less ability to adapt and reduce their emissions, also contribute the least to the problem. In contrast, higher income households, on average, tend to be more able to adapt to the impacts of climate change. They also have more opportunity and ability to reduce emissions because they are contributing more. Well, there's a lot more of these types of charts and graphs in our reports, which you can view at the webpage, which I'll link to in a moment. But one last result. This next graph shows where in the world Oregon's consumption-based emissions originate. Only about 32% physically arise within Oregon's borders. 68% occur in other U.S. states or countries. And because most of these emissions are out of state, it's easy to assume that they are also out of reach, especially to policymakers here in Oregon. Next slide, please. In 2023, the legislature, as part of House Bill 3409, directed DEQ to prepare a study evaluating whether that assumption is valid or not. And with the assistance of this commission, as well as the Stockholm Environment Institute, we undertook an analysis of policy options that culminated in a recent report next slide please, to the legislature along with 2 companion documents. In a nutshell, DEQ found that these emissions, even if mostly out of state, are not out of reach. While policy and incentives have traditionally focused on reducing emissions in the sector-based inventory, there is significant untapped potential to reduce consumption-based emissions as well. Next slide, please. For example, our report included a forecast of consumption-based emissions under a business-as-usual scenario. That's the top line of this graph. The purple wedge shows an estimate of how existing policies and programs, such as the Climate Protection Program and House Bill 2021, are expected to reduce Oregon's consumption-based emissions over time. And then the blue and green wedges show the additional reduction in emissions that could be realized through a variety of new programs. And we'll share 2 examples of those next, one involving food and the other involving housing production. Next slide, please. The US EPA and USDA estimate that between 25 to 40% of food grown or imported into this country is never eaten. And this wasting of food occurs throughout the economy, not only in homes, but also in businesses as well. Next slide, please. A few years ago, DEQ helped to catalyze the partnership shown here, the Pacific Coast Food Waste Commitment, which recruited retailers, manufacturers, and others to support a system of goal setting, assessment, action, and evaluation. For example, next slide, please. There was a project involving potato farmers, distributors, and retailers to identify causes of loss and waste across the potato supply chain and solutions to reduce that waste. Other projects took place at the level of individual businesses. At Bob's Red Mill, next slide, please, a food waste reduction challenge engaged employees who generated 176 suggestions for reducing waste, and just 2 of those ideas, involving changes to the machinery and process that fills packaging, reduced waste by almost 57 tons, with annual savings of over $3.6 million to this local food producer. By the end of 2023, more than 50% of the regional grocery market share in the Pacific states was tracking food waste. Next slide, please. And that tracking revealed that the rate at which food goes unsold at those retailers was down by 30%. That's a reduction in unsold and wasted food of 174,000 tons of food per year. And that's not composting, that's prevention. Changes in retailing strategies and ordering and inventory, for example. And the carbon footprint of that unsold food is 29% lower. Based on these successes, the nonprofit partners have expanded the project we started here in Oregon into a new nationwide U.S. Food Waste Pact. And again, that project started as an outcome of Oregon's consumption-based emissions inventory. So our second example involves embodied carbon in housing and will be shared by my colleague, Amanda Ingmeyer. Amanda?
Thanks, David. So as David mentioned, today I'm going to share a little bit of information about low embodied carbon housing, as well as some additional low embodied carbon examples in the built environment. So DEQ's low embodied carbon housing program launched late last year. It is funded as a part of Oregon's Climate Equity and Resilience Through Action grant. The program focuses on reducing emissions from building materials and construction while also providing much needed housing across the state. Next slide, please. So in total, the program will support 940 new low embodied carbon housing units in partnership with 9 local governments. These partners were selected because they had shovel-ready projects. The staff in these jurisdictions had the capacity to support project implementation. And as a whole, they represent a wide range of communities, geographies, and population sizes across the state of Oregon. Next slide, please. So as David mentioned earlier, the consumption-based emissions inventory report identified key strategies for reducing our consumption-based emissions. These emissions related to the built environment, we identified 3 key strategies. And this program puts all 3 of those strategies into practice. So projects must either reuse existing vacant or underutilized buildings by converting them to housing, or construct new space-efficient housing units. In addition, every project is required to reduce the embodied carbon of new construction materials by at least 10%. Next slide, please. To help project teams achieve that reduction target, DEQ has partnered with Carbon Leadership Forum, who is a nationally recognized leader in embodied carbon research and technical assistance. Carbon Leadership Forum developed 4 practical pathways that teams can use to reduce the embodied carbon impacts of new materials on their projects, which are shown here. And then on the next slide, please. DEQ and Carbon Leadership Forum have created a comprehensive toolkit to support project teams throughout their project design and construction. The toolkit includes guidance documents, calculation tools, procurement resources, and technical support materials. And in addition, DEQ and Carbon Leadership Forum will do one-on-one calls with these project teams as well. All of these resources are available on our program webpage and can help serve projects not only in the embodied carbon housing program, but also beyond. Next slide, please. The program has already generated strong market interest. More than half of the available rebates have been reserved, and additional projects are in the pipeline. These projects range from second-story apartments on Main Street in Pendleton, the picture on the lower part of the slide here, to a new 98-unit apartment development in Bend, the other picture on this slide. And altogether, the program is projected to reduce more than 343,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions by 2050. Next slide, please. I also wanted to briefly highlight some additional work happening in this space. So as directed by House Bill 3409, the Building Codes Division, with support from DEQ's Built Environment Program, published a study examining opportunities to reduce embodied carbon through building codes. This study identified 3 code-related opportunities that align closely with the strategies that we are using in the low embodied carbon housing program as well. According to the report, you can see more detail here on the slide, but these opportunities could reduce emissions by up to 50% in these different pathways. Next slide, please. Additionally, momentum for low embodied carbon materials and construction continues to grow. Several Oregon jurisdictions, along with the Oregon Department of Transportation, now require material transparency documentation for some projects and select materials. Multiple states across the country are also implementing Buy Clean policies. And the Pacific Coast Collaborative, in addition to the food work, also has a low carbon construction task force that continues to advance a shared regional action plan. Together, along with private industry demand, these efforts are helping move low carbon construction practices into the mainstream. And with that, I'll turn it back over to David.
Thanks so much, Amanda. I know that Colin was hoping to chime in today, but he's just gotten pulled away. That the CERTA Measure 10 project, he and other staff at DEQ have heard from staff at EPA, was considered to be really a standout, innovative element of DEQ of the state's application. The $197 million that the state received for all of those projects, including many of the transportation measures you heard about earlier today. And in EPA's scoring rubric, they gave a certain number of points for innovative projects. And it was this element, including consumption-based emissions and embodied carbon, and the work that Amanda and her team are doing to gather data about this topic that can be used in part not only to reduce emissions, but also inform future climate policy and programs that really made Oregon's application stand out above the crowd and win those extra points for innovation that perhaps had some role in helping Oregon land the larger grant, which was very exciting. So I'm going to close out
before
please.
you close out, I just want to say how important I think it is that the state has been a leader in this, and really appreciate it. So, sorry.
Thank you so much. I actually do have a few last comments I wanted to share here involving some themes that I think emerge from this work. And the first is that, when I started engaging with the commission on this topic 20 years ago, or 15 years ago, people would be like, oh yeah, well, how do we talk to the public so that the public will change their consumption? And there's this assumption that low carbon consumption will come about as a result of better information or persuasion of consumers. But a growing body of evidence is suggesting that persuasion-based programs often have limited lasting effectiveness. Rather than expecting individuals to make changes that might be expensive, difficult, inconvenient, or confusing, policies and incentives can change the options available to make lower carbon consumption more affordable, easy, or even automatic. So for example, in a state like Oregon, disposable food serviceware tends to have a higher carbon footprint than durable dishes, even when the impacts of washing are accounted for. But if durable dishes aren't available, it's not realistic to expect people to use them. No amount of persuasion will change that. Changing infrastructure and offering a financial incentive can remove barriers in ways that outreach and promotion by themselves cannot. My next theme involves accounting frameworks. Our report recommended, and the Commission also recommended in your own report to the legislature, that the state should update its greenhouse gas reduction goals to include a consumption-based element. And I want to share a graph that illustrates the importance of this. Next slide, please. This graph shows the global mitigation potential of several different measures contained in the state's draft Comprehensive Climate Action Plan. Briefly, while measures on the left, which focus on solid waste and reduce, reuse, recycle, have some potential, the greater potential is in policies that break out of the reduce, reuse, recycle framework and focus more holistically on materials across their life cycle. And I want to explore these last two bars with you. The upstream producer obligations bar represents several non-recycling elements contained in the Recycling Modernization Act of 2021. That act includes standards, incentives, and mandates for certain producers who sell product into Oregon to evaluate, publicly disclose, and reduce the environmental impacts of those items. There's also a producer-funded program that launches later this year to reduce the environmental impacts of certain materials through means other than recycling, such as industrial decarbonization. And we call these obligations upstream because they engage producers and they aren't related to recycling. The reduce embodied carbon measure on the right builds on the incentive type programs that Amanda just shared, but accelerates adoption by expanding incentives and supportive policy, including the ideas in that report from the Building Codes Division. So you can see that the greenhouse gas mitigation potential of these types of measures is not trivial, but if we view them only through the lens of the state's sector-based inventory, they may appear to be trivial. If we ignore Oregon's contribution to global emissions and focus only on emissions in the sector-based inventory, the results in this graph change to the ones in the next slide. There we go. In total, it makes these measures appear to have up to 11 times less potential than they actually do. And if that's how they're represented, it could diminish or disable support for these actions, which would be tragic since the climate doesn't respect Oregon's borders, right? So the last theme I want to share that comes from this work is that these types of policies hold potential to not only reduce emissions, but also to improve human, social, and economic conditions here in Oregon. Next slide, please. For example, producer responsibility laws, rather than regulating only in-state producers, create a more level playing field by obligating all producers that sell product into Oregon, regardless of whether they are located in-state or not. For consumers, programs can deliver co-benefits such as improved health outcomes for more walkable, connected neighborhoods, reductions in other types of pollution, and equity improvements, particularly related to access to both food and housing. So I'll just stop here with a few last words of gratitude. We really want to thank the Commission for its longstanding support for these work streams, for your support for the inventory, supporting the inclusion of consumption-based emissions in the state's climate goals, and taking targeted actions to reduce these emissions. So thank you again, and we'll stop here for your discussion.
Hey, Commissioner Lim.
Is it afternoon? Almost afternoon. Good afternoon.
Almost.
And thank you very much for this presentation, David and colleagues. I found it to be very, very useful. I remember when we used to talk about the concept of life cycle emissions, but we didn't quite know how to do it a couple of decades before. So you're making such significant progress. It's really, I'm super happy to see it. I was wondering if I could ask you a question, and can I ask you to go back to the slide where you show the trend over time comparing the consumption based with the sector based. And I'll try to say something useful about where I sit from where I sit. So that one exactly.
Okay.
So in the data on trade flows, you can actually see some of this if you look at trade flows of goods. When I saw this slide, what it made me think about is during the period of low interest rates, for example, and during when people were investing in housing, single family housing, multifamily housing, one of the innovations was all these different parts of a house actually can get built overseas and then get shipped in large quantities. It's so I think that's really interesting, and we're in a period now of no longer low interest rates. So people's spending patterns, their consumption patterns are probably different. Now we're building things like data centers, so we'll see what happens with that. But I still think that you have an economic cycle thing going on there. If I wonder if you would agree with me. If you look, see, we had the recession in 2008, and so that big upswing is consistent with the big, we had a long coming back from the recession, the great financial crisis, and then you have a downturn, is that around COVID or something? So do you think this is mostly like economy driven, or how would you think about that?
Thank you, Commissioner Lewis. Yes. Sorry, Commissioner Lem. Yeah, this is definitely driven by larger economic patterns. And we have a graph that we didn't share here, but which you can see in our 2021 report that shows how increasing per capita consumption is the primary driver of this trend over time. And even as the normalized inflation adjusted carbon footprint of consumption, has gone down because of efficiency and industrial decarbonization and all the good work that people are doing in response to the sector-based inventory. While the emissions per dollar spent have gone down, all of those gains have been wiped out and then some by the rising tide of consumption. And that rising tide of consumption is more driven actually by an increase in spending by Oregonians than it is on a per capita basis than it is population. So there's this macroeconomic trend. And then there is the economic cycle, which we do see here. For example, the reason that the 2010 consumption-based emissions are barely higher than the 2005 consumption-based emissions is because in 2010, we were still coming out of the Great Recession.
Thank you.
You want to do? Mr. Lim, do you want to do any follow-up?
Oh, no, I'll just say thank you for that. And I'll look forward to reading the report and learning more about what you've been doing here. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Von Hagen.
Yes, thank you. Great, really great and interesting report. I'm curious what we are doing with other states, just appreciating, first of all, the importance of the manufacturing and the importance of having those systems in place, but also recognizing how much market power Oregon has in the world, and curious whether we're collaborating with California, with other Western states, or other, sort of large consumer states to really drive the behavior we're looking for from manufacturers.
Thank you. We are trying to do that. The uptake is inconsistent. Some states are intrigued by these policy ideas, others are not. I think the best example I might share is in the policy space involving product-based obligations, where you regulate not the producer in the state, but the producer who sells the product into the state, which really gives us a lot more leverage. There's a lot happening in the last 5 years, taking that policy concept and focusing it on recycling and end-of-life management. For example, Oregon was the first state to adopt extended producer responsibility for packaging, and there are now 6 other states who have followed. We're in that pack. We are out in front in taking this concept and applying it more broadly to try to get at these sort of upstream design changes. So I think there's potential, but it's taking a while for the policymakers to realize that they have that potential. Again, there's sort of a implicit bias that there's not much states can do, and it's taking a while to overcome that bias.
Okay, let me log off here.
I think it'd be great to have something come to the commission about that, about the leadership in Oregon. So, Commissioner Dotson.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the interesting presentation. It's pretty thought-provoking. I think the point I is sort of building on this market, or Oregonians' market power. I guess I had an observation, which is I think unlike sector-based emissions inventory in the state, in which we are emitting it directly here and sort of have a direct control and can kind of see the benefits of our actions, there's a few steps removed in looking at consumption-based inventories. You have to, you're assuming you have to have some confidence in emissions calculations of products that are coming from perhaps overseas, very far away. Perhaps there's not a lot of transparency. You're looking at, the reason Oregon has had an ability to affect vehicle sales is because of its combined market share with in following California's emission standards over the years, and that amounts to at times as much as 40% of new car market. When I look at your chart of the kinds of places where we're seeing embodied carbon coming into the state, and I see vehicles and I see appliances, it makes me think that is not as well suited for kind of an overall emissions reduction target as we have for sector-based standards here in the state. So here we could talk about getting a 70% reduction or a 90% reduction or whatever we would like to do. I don't think it's as well suited when we look at consumption-based standards. And in part that might be because it would be, they're just not as, every area is not as susceptible for state action. So I think of, I haven't checked in on this recently, but a few years ago there was there was projections that we could have low carbon concrete that was wasn't at a premium from concrete that was not low carbon. We only have one cement kiln in our state, and so that's a good opportunity, and potentially to where you could see buying, education or buying preferences for state projects that could significantly reduce carbon, or perhaps even move our own our own industries in that direction. When you think about reducing emissions of appliances that may be produced in China, I don't know that we have that market power. And so anyway, I guess I guess all I'm doing is providing my own reaction, a little bit of context to what I see as how this kind of information really does need a lot of context and sort of specific focus on the exact source that you're looking at to make sure, you're actually having any impact whatsoever, that you can have confidence in the numbers that you're getting from those inventories, and that we have the market power to do anything about it. So food for thought.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Dotson. Any reaction? Do you want to spend, and then we'll go to Commissioner Lynn?
Very quickly, Commissioner Dotson, points well made and well received. Thank you. I think we have more influence over out-of-state producers than maybe some folks, or maybe than might be apparent at first blush. I mean, when we implement, as we're implementing the Recycling Modernization Act, and specifically the non-recycling elements of it, that I mentioned, the standards, the accounting standards, which are now in administrative rule for the assessment and disclosure of carbon impact over the life cycle of the product, that's an administrative rule. It's actually a massive precedent that Oregon has established. And what we routinely hear back from national and global producers is that on this topic, quote, Oregon punches above its weight class. unquote, which might be why we've become a bit of a punching bag in the courts on this topic from national organizations as well. And then, so I think there is actually quite a bit we can do. And Amanda, maybe you'd like to share the work we did with the concrete industry would be relevant here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we did for about 3 years, we were partnered with the Oregon Concrete and Aggregate Producers Association, where we actually supported concrete producers around the state in getting environmental product declarations. So that was what I referred to more generally earlier as the material transparency. And in doing that, we were able to fund over 1,500 EPDs for concrete products across the state, which makes Oregon the leading producer of EPDs in the concrete industry. And this also gets to the earlier question as well, but one of the successes we saw of that was we do have some other states who are interested in partnering with us to continue that momentum into other parts of the built environment materials industry. And we had received a separate federal grant to do that work with the state of Washington and the International Code Council, who publishes the model building codes that then we adopt as a state as well as other states. However, that was one of the grants that was eliminated at a later date, unfortunately, because we would have worked with 4 different building material industries across the Pacific Northwest to put more EPDs on the market. And the reason I want to mention the EPD specifically is it's similar to what David is mentioning with the Recycling Modernization Act. That's the standard protocol for understanding the environmental impacts and specifically embodied carbon of those materials in the construction sector. So yeah, similar reflection as David, as I think we do have some opportunities to address that at our statewide level, and we have a lot of regional momentum through the partnerships we've built.
Really interesting. It sort of makes me also think about some different things. To sort of follow on Greg's comments and questions, I think it's a good thing that the state of Oregon that we're trying to move forward with things like this. Certainly, with the drawback of federal leadership in certain areas, the importance of the states as a laboratory of democracy for doing new things, I think, takes on a higher importance. I do agree with Greg's a little bit on the question of the data, so I'm glad to hear about the accounting standards and hope that there's just sort of documentation of thorough vetting and peer review and so forth. One thing I would just mention then to close is that, of course, the new tariff environment might also change the whole, set of calculations. So I'm not sure how you would use the information. It's backwards looking, really good information. I'm not sure how you adjust for that in the tariffs environment, but maybe that's something you all can think about that. So again, this is really good work, and I feel very supportive of this. So I hope you can continue.
Response that you want to make?
Sure. Thank you again for your words of support there. Certainly, you mentioned Commissioner Lem several decades ago when people were talking about life cycle assessment, and the analytical technique has advanced a lot in the last several decades. The adoption by businesses has increased a lot, and Amanda had a slide that showed Ferreras Lumber and Roseburg and other in-state producers who are now using LCA to produce these environmental product declarations about their products. But the accounting world remains a bit of the wild, wild west, I would say. Even though there are product category rules that producers are supposed to follow that are intended to ensure that the EPDs produced by competing companies are in fact comparable, the accounting standards in those product category rules are often fairly lax. And this is where Oregon is again taking a really important leadership role, is that we are the first state, to my knowledge, to put accounting rules for the assessment and disclosure of life cycle impacts into administrative rule. And we have done so in a way that attempts to tighten a bunch of those loopholes so that producers who follow those rules in the context of our incentives in the Plastic Pollution and Recycling Modernization Act, and the producers who are mandated to do so, hopefully are going to be producing declarations that are more consistent and also more transparent in how they're produced. And we have a number of rules involving transparency and independent third-party review, and et cetera. So we are attempting to tame that wild, wild west. I sometimes say it is analogous to the early years of the Securities and Exchange Commission, which was created, in the 1930s to tame the wild, wild west of financial accounting, which brought on a terrible economic crisis. Well, we have a problem with the accounting of environmental impacts that is contributing to a terrible environmental crisis. And ironically, Oregon finds itself in the position of being one of the first entities to try to do something about it. The steps we're taking do not go far enough, but they are exciting and precedent setting in that we are taking the first steps to do so.
Thank you. That sounds great. Any other follow-up comments? I think we're over, but we're close to time. There are a few other questions. We can take them. Okay,
If I could
public
just
comments.
I'm sorry, can I quickly
Yes,
respond
David.
to Commissioner
ahead.
Dotson's comment in the chat? Yes, automobiles and appliances are the first and third largest contributor to emissions, and most of those emissions come from the use of those. And the emissions from the use of automobiles and appliances are being addressed through programs that we heard about this morning and appliance standards and House Bill 2021. So there's already a lot of work being focused on reducing the use phase emissions of vehicles and appliances. And that's where the majority of those emissions occur.
So just a clarification on your chart, those were fuel consumption emissions.
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
The use phase emissions were fuel consumption emissions. They were life cycle. For vehicles, there was about 3 million metric tons associated with producing the vehicles, which is, the supply chain of vehicle manufacturing.
Yes.
And that is harder to get to, although there are some policy options out there that could work in that space. And we have a briefing on that on our website if you'd like to see it.
Can you just show us that chart that Greg's referring to just real quickly?
Maybe I misunderstood the color scheme there.
The way I saw that was like you had upstream and downstream. We used to talk about upstream and downstream, and for appliances and for transportation vehicles, it was the other one, I think.
Go back about 10 slides.
Further.
Yeah. So you had sort of the fuel burn for transportation, just like for the fuel burn using an appliance, and then you have a smaller number for upstream and downstream.
Yes.
If I read it right.
That's correct. We're almost there. Keep going, like 2 or 3 more. Almost. Keep going. 3 more maybe. There we go. Yep. Nope. Go back. Sorry. Whoa. Too far. Go forward, please. Forward, please. One more. Yeah, so if you look at vehicles and parts that sort of mustard color. Nope, sorry. Where were we? Go back, please.
There's a lag.
Okay. There we go. Stop. Right there. Vehicles and parts that mustard colored is the emissions associated with producing the vehicles and their supply chain. And the gray are the emissions associated with using the vehicles and parts. And that overlap I was talking about between the two inventories, a lot of that overlap is the gray portion of this bar chart. It's the emissions from energy used to power vehicles, appliances, electronics,
I
and
understand
lighting.
this. I understand your chart now.
Okay. Thank you.
Chair, we have 2 hands up.
Oh, sorry. Yes, Rick Gamma.
Thanks. Just really quickly, I would be interested in the conversation around what levers we can pull at a state, policy point on this issue. This is not surprising. I'm really glad you're bringing this forward. When Milwaukee did its climate action plan, we determined that even though we're an industrial city, blah, 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 all the things that people consume actually equaled all of our other emissions in the city. And it is a harder nut to crack. So I am all ears if you have thoughts. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
Any response?
We'd be happy to follow up with you, Rep. Gambo. Thank you.
All right, I think we're moving into public comment.
Chair, this is Jeff Crook with Odo. If members of the public have comments to share, we ask that they please use the raise hand feature on the menu bar there, and we will call your name. Appreciate that. Okay, I'm seeing one hand raised, and that's Joe Courtwright, and he is actually on the screen.
Thank you.
Chair
Welcome,
McDonald,
Joe.
members. Sorry, Chair McDonald, members of the commission. For the record, Joe Courtwright. I'm an economist with City Observatory. Thank you so much for the opportunity to testify. Apologies. I want to address an issue that came up at your last commission meeting. You heard a presentation from the Oregon Department of Transportation about the progress that we're supposedly making in terms of meeting our climate goals with regard to transportation, which is the largest and, as you know, fastest growing source of greenhouse gases. Unfortunately, the information that was presented to you by the Department of Transportation was not accurate. They overstated and misstated the amount of progress that we're making. As you know, we have a two-pronged strategy for reducing transportation emissions. Cleaner cars and vehicles is one of them, or cleaner fuels and vehicles is one of them. The other, and the critical one for our purposes, is reducing vehicle miles of travel. In testimony, the Oregon Department of Transportation presented a graph purporting to claim that we have achieved a 9% reduction in VMT per capita, which is about half of the goal that the state has established. Those numbers, according to ODOT's own data, aren't accurate. The decline has actually only been 7%. And in fact, all of the decline in VMT per capita in Oregon happened before they adopted their statewide transportation strategy that called for greenhouse gas reductions. In short, there's been no decrease in VMT per capita since ODOT adopted its STS. In fact, for the last 5 years, VMT per capita is increasing. So manifestly, we are failing to meet our climate goals. And that's particularly serious because at a time when our VMT is increasing by about 0.5% per year, about 0.5% per year, we need to be reducing VMT per capita by 0.6% per year in order to achieve our stated goals. This is in essence a scientific body. You've just listened to some extensive presentations of very good research on the subject. You need to insist that the Oregon Department of Transportation provide to you factual information about the progress that we're making. And frankly, the material that was submitted to you at your last meeting was either inaccurate or fraudulent or simply misleading. And I just also want to stress that this is critically important because ODOT is proposing to spend something on the order of $15 to $20 billion widening freeways in the Portland metropolitan area, which will increase greenhouse gas driving and greenhouse gas emissions. In fact, the projections that ODOT is using to justify those projects assume that there will be no decrease in VMT per capita. That is, their projections violate the very standards that they claim to be meeting. And that's alarming because all of the independent objective data on transportation in the Portland area shows that greenhouse gas emissions are increasing, not decreasing. That is, in the last 5 years, Portland area greenhouse gas transportation has gone up by 0.8% per year when it needs to be declining at about more than 4% per year to reach our objectives. So please, you are a scientific body. You should rest your decisions on facts. Please do not accept misleading information from what is essentially the largest polluter in the state and its enabler, the Oregon Department of Transportation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Joe. I really appreciate it. Any other public comments? Sandy?
Chair, there are no other hands raised.
Okay, thank you.
Chair,
All
may
right.
I make a brief comment?
Yes.
Suzanne Carlson, Department of Transportation. I appreciate Mr. Courtwright's comments. We provided data that was through 2023, and there is a new data point that would add 2024, which would change that percentage that Oregon has reduced. So we'll incorporate that into the chart. Thanks.
So you've got a little bit of new data. Does that change the trajectory?
I think we can, when we come
Suzanne?
back to you.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. When we come back to you, let's talk about that more in depth. I understand this is just public comment, so I just wanted to make that comment that there is a new data point that we'll add on there. And it does go up just a little bit, as Mr. Courtwright notes, in 2024.
Joe, do you want to make one more comment?
Thank you. The data that they're talking about, the 2024 data, was on the ODOT website on April 10th when they made their presentation to you. And they misstated the data for 2023. And the simple point of the data is VMT is up 0.5% per year since 2019. It is not going down. It is going up.
Okay, thank you. Any other public comments? Okay, thank you. Let's go to our final agenda item, which I think is just next steps. Jeff?
Chair, can you see my slide? Are you not seeing my screen?
I see public comments.
Data issue. I've got the slide up.
Okay, so we have next steps, and our next meeting is June 12th. We're gonna hear about the Tickery work, the Tigger work, and National Climate Solutions work. And we'll hear a little more about the legislature work that happened in this last year. So then we have a meeting on July 17th and August 14th. So we'll continue work on the ticker results and our National Climate Solutions work. We'll hear again from the transportation folks about transportation emissions and their monitoring results. And then in August, we'll hear about national climate work and work on the Climate Action Commission procedures and manual that we're working on. So we've got a lot of work in front of us. So a lot of next steps, but thank you to everyone, and look forward to seeing you next month.
Thanks.
Thank you, Chair McDonald, for a fine meeting.